Chapter 678 Spiritual State. In a courtyard of the mansion master's mansion, the old man sat in the pavilion and looked at Qin Feiyang and the others with a livid face. Qin Feiyang and the others stood in front of the old man obediently, not daring to even breathe loudly. "Ha!" Suddenly, "Old master," Li laughed in relief. They looked at each other. They all thought that the old man was going to punish them, but he laughed instead. Fatso whispered, "Do you think the old man is having a stroke?" "You're the one who's having a stroke." The old man stopped laughing and glared fiercely at the fatty, saying, "I laughed because I remembered the faces of the Yin State Manor Lord and the other old bastards back then. So, it doesn't mean that I'm not angry." Fatso pursed his lips. "It's not our fault. Why are you angry? Still complaining?" "This matter is indeed not your fault. But before you go to Yinzhou, shouldn't you inform me first? Do you know how worried I was when I heard that you were causing trouble in Yinzhou?" The old man said angrily. They scratched their heads and laughed awkwardly. "But fortunately, you're smart enough to get the evidence first. Otherwise, even I can't protect you today." The old man snorted. Fatso said proudly, "Of course, we never do things that we're not sure of." "Forget it." The old man rolled his eyes at him and said, "This matter is over, so this old man won't pursue it anymore. However, this old man hopes that you won't cause any more trouble for me before we enter the imperial capital." "Yes." The few of them stood up straight and replied respectfully. Looking at their serious faces, the old man couldn't help but shake his head and laugh. He looked at Fatso and said, "Do you still want to kill the Yinzhou mansion master?" Fatso nodded without hesitation. "I won't persuade you because she deserves it, but you have to act according to your strength. After all, she's not simple," the old man reminded. Fatso said, "I understand. It's good that you know." The old man smiled and waved his hand. "You can go now. The previous mansion lord has already gone to the imperial capital to report the situation of the Great War of the 9 states to the emperor. I estimate that she will come and take you to the imperial capital in a few days. Do what you need to do. Don't leave behind any regrets." "All right." Qin Feiyang and the others nodded. But just as they turned around, the old man said, "Qin Feiyang, wait a moment before you leave. This old man has a few words to say to you." Qin Feiyang was stunned. He nodded and said to Fatso and Wolf King, "You guys go to Uncle Yan's place. I'll find you later." "All right." Fatso nodded. He immediately opened the portal and left with Wolf King. Lu Xingqian also returned to the inner hall. Qin Feiyang turned to look at the old man and said with a smile, "Don't tell me you want me to take good care of my sister again." The old man rolled his eyes and sighed. "This old man only has one granddaughter. I really can't rest assured. And this old man can't trust the others. I can only rely on you." Qin Feiyang smiled faintly and said, "Don't worry, I will take good care of her." "With your words, this old man can rest assured. One more thing. Can you tell me the whereabouts of your Uncle Ren now?" The old man looked at him nervously. Qin Feiyang hesitated. After a moment he said with a smile, "He is in the canyon below the ruins." "What?" The old man suddenly stood up, his eyes full of shock. "Don't worry, he will be fine. As for why he is there, I promised him that I won't tell anyone, including you." Qin Feiyang said, "A person must keep his word. This old man understands. Actually, this old man doesn't really care about the reason. I just want to know that he is safe." The old man said with a smile. Qin Feiyang was stunned. He smiled bitterly and said, "You are really indifferent." The old man shook his head and said, "It can't be helped. I am old, and there are many things that I can't do. Go about your business." Qin Feiyang looked at the old man deeply. He turned around and opened a portal. Just as he was about to walk in, he suddenly thought of something and turned to the old man and asked, "After you retire, do you plan to let Wang Hong take over the position of mansion master?" Yes. His ability is the strongest among all the commanders. Most importantly, he is just like this old man. He has a just and fair heart. This old man has already asked the previous mansion master to recommend him to the emperor. The old man said with a smile. Qin Feiyang nodded and didn't stay any longer. He turned around and stepped into the portal. After arriving at the sacred hall, he drank with Yan Nanshan until evening. Only then did Qin Feiyang leave with Fatso and Wolf King. Following that, they went to visit Lu Yun and chatted until late into the night. When they returned to the inner hall, most of the inner hall disciples had gone to cultivate. There was dead silence everywhere. In the sky, the full moon hung high in the sky, and the stars twinkled. Under the moonlight, the entire inner hall seemed to be covered in a layer of silver. 2 men and 1 wolf stood above the Pillfire Hall and scanned the mountains and rivers below. Fatso asked, Boss, do you remember how long we have been in the state capital? I've been too busy. I can't remember. Qin Feiyang shook his head. That's right. I've been so busy that I can't even remember the time. It's obvious how much we have experienced here. To be honest, we are about to leave. I really can't bear to leave. Fatso sighed. How pretentious. Wolf King rolled his eyes. It's not pretentious. It's emotional. Because once we leave, we don't know when we will return. It was rare that Fatso didn't bicker with Wolf King. His brows were filled with sadness. Then stay here and take a good look. Give me the herbs. I'll refine the pills. Qin Feiyang said with a faint smile. The herbs are with Lu Hong. Fatso responded and asked with a voice transmission, Boss, aren't you going to visit the mermaid princess? Qin Feiyang's body stiffened. Fatso said, It's been so many years. I'm sure she misses you. Even I can't see any hope. How can I give her hope? Qin Feiyang laughed self-deprecatingly. He shook off Fatso's hand and stepped into the air without looking back. The Wolf King glanced at Qin Feiyang's back and said angrily, I say, you damn fatty, why do you have to bring it up? Did Fat Lord say something wrong? Boss actually likes the mermaid princess very much. Fatso snorted through his nose. You're right. Little Qin Zi does have feelings for the mermaid princess. But you also know that he doesn't dare to face this feeling now. So, don't mention this again in the future. When he finishes all his grudges in the capital, he will naturally go to her. Wolf King said. Got it. Fatso nodded. After pondering for a while, he said, I guess the biggest problem for Boss now is E. That's right. This little girl is indeed a headache. Wolf King sighed. If it's up to Fat Lord, just accept them all. Anyway, Boss is the future emperor of the great Qin Empire. It's normal for him to have many wives and concubines. Fatso said. Wolf King rolled his eyes at him and said, Love is not as simple as you say. Let nature take its course. It's really troublesome. Tell me, why do we have to be in love? Fatso wondered. Damn, I'm not human. How would I know? Wolf King cursed angrily. Suddenly he stared at a place below and said in surprise, Isn't that Lu Xingqian and Shen Mei? Fatso was stunned and hurriedly asked, Where? Where? Wolf King pointed to the square outside the cultivation hall and said, There. Fatso hurriedly looked over and found Lu Xingqian and Shen Mei at the edge of the square. Why are the 2 of them stuck together? And in the middle of the night? It's not normal, Fatso thought for a while and said with a smile, Do you want to go take a look? Of course. Wolf King smiled sinisterly. Then 1 man and 1 wolf stealthily sneaked in that direction. Pillfire Hall. Pill Refining Room 1. This was originally Dong Fang Wuhin's pill refining room, but now that he was dead, it naturally fell to Qin Feiyang. After wandering around the pill refining room a few times, Qin Feiyang entered the castle and looked at Lu Hong with a smile. Have you sorted out the herbs you swept in the Butterfly Valley? Yes. Lu Hong nodded. Qin Feiyang asked with a smile, What's the result? I've collected 2 portions of 9 turned dragon blood pills. Now, I'm only missing 2 portions of dragon blood. I've also collected 3 portions of spirit sea pills. There are 4 portions of essence soul pills. There are also a lot of herbs for potential pills, 9 chew yellow dragon pills, and red fire colored glass pills. In short, it's not bad. Lu Hong said with a smile. Qin Feiyong was overjoyed. This was not just not bad, it was a great harvest. I've also divided the herbs Yin Yuanming gave us, according to the 30/70. For the 3,000 portions of red fire colored glass pills, we should have 900 portions. For the 500 portions of potential pills, we should have 150 portions. For the rest of the pills, we should have 30,000 portions each. I've put all the herbs in this Qinkuan bag. As Lu Hong spoke, she took out a Qinkuan bag from her arms. Qin Feiyong looked at the Qinkuan bag and said with a smile, "Keep these herbs first and give them to me when I need them." Okay. Lu Hong put away the Qinkuan bag and took out another Qinkuan bag, saying, "The herbs in here are all for Yin Yuanming. There are a lot of them. I'm afraid it will take at least half a month." Half a month? Qin Feiyong frowned. Yes, 2,100 portions of red fire colored glass pills. 350 portions of potential pills. As for the other pills, such as healing pills, bone replenishing pills, regeneration pills, and so on, there are 70,000 portions of each. In total, there are more than 500,000 portions of herbs. I think it's impossible to refine them in half a month. Lu Hong shook her head and said with a smile, "This old fox is really greedy." Qin Feiyong was a little annoyed. With his current refining speed, he could refine 1 pill every 10 breaths. This was already very fast. However, even if he didn't stop and rest, he could only refine 300,000 pills in half a month at most. And the old man said that he would probably enter the capital in a few days. There was no time at all. Lu Hong asked, "Why don't we return all these herbs to him?" "Forget it. We can't go back on our word since we've promised him. Besides, if we really return them, we won't be able to earn the 900 portions of red fire colored glass pills and 150 portions of potential pills. This is also a huge fortune. Let's see how many we can refine." Chapter 679. 7 days passed in the blink of an eye. In these 7 days, the news of Qin Feiyong and the others returning from the 9 nether yellow springs had already spread throughout the major cities of the state capital. Many people with power and influence came to pay him a visit out of admiration. However, not only did they not see Qin Feiyong, but they also did not see Lu Xingqin, Dong Jingyang, and the others. In the eyes of these people, Qin Feiyong and the others seemed to have disappeared from the face of the earth. In fact, everyone was cultivating in seclusion to adjust their state. After all, they had been fighting in the 9 nether yellow springs all these years and were always in a state of high alert. Therefore, both physically and mentally, they were quite tired. Now that they were about to go to the capital, they naturally had to adjust. As for Qin Feiyong, he stayed in the alchemy room all day these 7 days, so busy that he was sweating profusely. At noon that day, all of a sudden, the image crystal in his chest started to move. Qin Feiyong ignored it. After refining the pills in the furnace, he took out the image crystal. Buzz! The figure of an old man appeared. It was the old man. The old man frowned and said, "What are you doing?" Qin Feiyong smiled faintly and said, "I was refining pills just now. What's wrong?" The old man said, "Pack up quickly and gather at the Butterfly Valley." Qin Feiyong was slightly stunned and asked, "You're going to the capital now?" The old man nodded. Qin Feiyong hesitated for a moment and said, "Can you wait a few more days? I still have some pills that haven't been refined." "No, come right away," the old man said without any room for discussion. After that, he directly turned off the image crystal. Qin Feiyang shook his head with a wry smile and sent a message to Yin Yuanming. When Yin Yuanming learned of the situation, he immediately opened the portal and descended into the alchemy room. I say, Brother Qin, aren't you being too unreasonable? In any case, you should at least finish refining before leaving. As soon as Yin Yuanming appeared, he couldn't help but complain. Qin Feiyang said helplessly, I want to, but old master won't let me. Why don't you talk to old master? Yin Yuanming's face twitched. Wasn't looking for the old master the same as looking for a scolding? Yin Yuanming asked, How many have you refined? A few 100,000. Qin Feiyang wasn't sure either, because he had been refining for the past 7 days. He had not counted. So little? Yin Yuanming frowned. You still think it's not enough? Let me tell you, you're lucky to have met me. If it were anyone else, you would give them hundreds of thousands of sets of herbs at once. Who would want to refine it for you? Besides, I haven't rested since I came back from the netherworld. Do you think it's easy for me? Qin Feiyang said unhappily. Yes. I've troubled you. Yin Yuanming smiled embarrassedly. Old man, Qin Feiyang's face darkened. He pointed to a chinkuan bag next to the furnace and said, The medicinal pills are all inside. Yin Yuanming grabbed the chinkuan bag and checked it carefully. His face was filled with ecstasy. They were all medicinal pills with 3 Dan veins. Moreover, red fire-colored glass pill and potential pill were both refined. As long as these 2 medicinal pills were refined, it didn't matter if the other medicinal pills were refined or not. Qin Feiyang joked, Do you feel better now? Yes. Yin Yuanming chuckled. Qin Feiyang rolled his eyes at him, took out another chinkuan bag from his bosom, and said, These are the remaining medicinal herbs. Yin Yuanming hurriedly waved his hand and said, No need. Just take it as a farewell gift for you. Originally, he thought that it was only a medicinal pill with 2 Dan veins. But now that he looked at it, it was actually all 3 Dan veins. The value was completely different. Farewell gift? Qin Feiyang was stunned. Then he couldn't help but shake his head and laugh. At the same time, Yin Yuanming also put away the chinkuan bag, and his expression became serious. Brother Qin, although I have never been to the imperial capital, but I can imagine that it is definitely crueler than the state capital. After you go, no matter what happens, you must not be reckless. Thank you. Also, please help me take good care of Aunt Snow. Qin Feiyang said. Don't worry. Yin Yuanming smiled and cupped his hands. Then I will take my leave. Let's meet again if fate wills it. Qin Feiyang cupped his hands. Yin Yuanming opened a teleportation gate, took a deep look at Qin Feiyang, and then turned and walked in. When the teleportation gate dissipated, Qin Feiyang took out the image crystal again and sent a message to Fatso and Wolf King. These 2 fellows, ever since they separated that night, had never appeared again. It was unknown where they had been fooling around these past few days. A moment later, Fatso and Wolf King materialized. Behind them were endless mountains and rivers. Qin Feiyang frowned and said, Where are you? Fatso said, The mountains outside the city. Why? Qin Feiyang said, Let's go to Butterfly Valley immediately. The old man is already waiting for us there. Fatso said, Go to the imperial capital. Qin Feiyang nodded. Fatso was refreshed and said, Okay, we will go there right away. We will bring 2 friends along with us. Friends? Qin Feiyang was taken aback, but before he could ask, Fatso turned off the image crystal. What friends? Muttering in confusion, Qin Feiyang put away the image crystal and took out a teleportation gate. But just as he was about to open the teleportation gate, he suddenly stopped and lowered his head to ponder. Finally, he entered the castle and looked at Lin Yi. At this moment, Lin Yi and Lu Hong stood together. It was unknown what they were talking about, but there was a smile on their faces. Qin Feiyang asked curiously, "What are you talking about? Why are you smiling so happily?" Lu Hong smiled and said, "Nothing, just some topics between women." Qin Feiyang smiled and looked at Lin Yi again. Before he spoke, Lin Yi said, "You don't have to say anything. I have decided to stay." "Yi," Qin Feiyang murmured, and an inexplicable sadness rose in his heart. Although Lin Yi said it straightforwardly, her dim eyes exposed her true thoughts deep in her heart. In fact, she wanted to go to the imperial capital. To be exact, she wanted to be with him. Lin Yi smiled and said, "Brother Feiyang, you don't have to think about me. I will live well in the spiritual state." But this smile was stiff. Looking at this smile, Qin Feiyang's heart suddenly felt a burst of pain. Lin Yi calmly stretched out her hands and smiled. "Brother Feiyang, this farewell may be forever. Can I hug you one last time?" Qin Feiyang sighed secretly and stepped forward. The two hugged each other. At this moment, Lin Yi was obsessed with him like never before. She couldn't help but burst into tears, blurring her vision. But she did not cry. She wept silently. After a while, she forced a smile and whispered, "Brother Feiyang, when you go to the imperial capital, you must take good care of yourself." "I will. You have to take care of yourself, too. If you encounter any trouble, let the old man find a way to inform me. I will definitely rush back as soon as possible," Qin Feiyang reminded, and his nose couldn't help but sour. Lin Yi nodded, quietly wiped away her tears, got up, pushed Qin Feiyang away, and smiled. "Don't let the old man wait for a long time. Send me out." Sigh. Qin Feiyang sighed again and appeared in the alchemy room with Lin Yi. Immediately, Lin Yi took a few steps back and looked at Qin Feiyang silently. Qin Feiyang waved his hand and the portal opened. It was at this moment he suddenly felt that he was simply a bastard. He should feel lucky to have a woman who likes him so much. He should cherish her. But yet, time and time again, he had made the other party cry. He couldn't wait to slap himself a few times. "I really don't know how lucky I am." Lin Yi smiled and said, "What are you thinking about? Why aren't you going? If the old man gets angry, the consequences will be very serious." Qin Feiyang's mind trembled, and he suddenly made a decision. He turned to look at Lin Yi and said, "If I can survive in the imperial capital, I will definitely come back to find you." After saying that, he turned around resolutely and walked into the portal. At the same time, Lin Yi also smiled. Like a blooming flower, she was particularly beautiful. Butterfly Valley, Rin Wushuang, Lu Xingqian, Dong Zhenyang, and Shenmei were all present. Fatso and Wolf King also came. Only Qin Feiyang had not arrived yet. The old man, the former mansion master, and Wang Hong stood together, frowning tightly. They seemed very unhappy. Swish! Suddenly, there was a shock in the void, and a white figure appeared out of thin air. Fatso hurriedly said, "Boss is here." The old man looked up, and his old face suddenly became angry. He said, "I asked you to come immediately. What are you waiting for?" The ugly old woman followed and said, "I asked you to go to the imperial capital, but you are still so slow. You might as well not go." Qin Feiyang's face changed. He hurriedly admitted his mistake and said, "I'm sorry. I was delayed by something." The old man rolled his eyes at him and looked at everyone. "Since everyone is here, I will announce one thing." "What is it?" Everyone was puzzled. The old man said, "Wang Hong has now been officially appointed as the mansion master of the spiritual state. Remember to call him mansion master in the future. Don't call him commander anymore." "Sure enough," Qin Feiyang murmured. Dong Jingyan and the others looked a little shocked, especially Ren Wushuang. She glanced at Wang Hong, then looked at the old man and asked, "Grandpa, what about you?" The old man smiled and said, "Grandpa is old. It's time to put down the burden. I will stay here in the future and guard this altar." But Ren Wushuang still wanted to say something. The old man waved his hand and said, "Don't say it. This is the rule. After going to the imperial capital, remember to work hard. Don't embarrass Grandpa." Ren Wushwang nodded. "Then let's go. I hope you can all make a name for yourself in the imperial capital." The old man smiled. Before leaving, everyone was a little sad. Dong Jingyang bowed and said, "Old man, thank you for your nurturing over the years. No matter where I go in the future, I will never forget that I am a member of the spiritual state." Lu Xingqin and Shen Mei also nodded. The old man smiled and said, "I am satisfied that you all have this heart. Go. Old man, take care. Grandpa, take care." Then they turned around and followed behind the ugly old woman as they walked towards the small wooden building. But at this moment, Wang Hong sent a voice transmission. "Qin Feiyang, what do you think of the matter I told you last time?" Chapter 680. Who? Wang Hong was taken aback and asked secretly. Qin Feiyang said, "Lin Yi. She is now in alchemy room number 1 in the inner hall. I will have to trouble you to take care of her for me in the future." "Okay, thank you," Wang Hong said gratefully in secret. "With our relationship, it's too polite to thank me. Let's go. Take care." Qin Feiyang responded with a smile, then took Fatso and Wolf King, turned around, and chased after Lu Xingqin and others. Looking at the back of the group of people, the old master sighed. Our spiritual state finally has someone going to the capital. It's not easy. Yeah, Wang Hong nodded and smiled again. I believe this will be a good start. Yes, in the future, our spiritual state will definitely have many talents. By the way, you and Qin Feiyang were flirting with each other just now. Did you say something secretly? The old master asked. Wang Hong shook his head and smiled. It's nothing. I just told him to keep a low profile in the capital. Really? The old master looked at him suspiciously. Do you think I will lie to you? Wang Hong smiled bitterly. That's true. According to his character, if no one restrains him, I don't know what kind of trouble he will cause in the capital. But this kid is not an ordinary person. Let's not worry about him. The old master smiled. Wang Hong nodded. Swish! At this moment, a middle-aged man descended in front of the old master and Wang Hong. Jiang Qianqing? Wang Hong was taken aback and puzzled. What are you doing here? Jiang Qianqing smiled. I'm here to say goodbye to you too. Goodbye? The old master and Wang Hong looked at each other and looked at Jiang Qianqing suspiciously. I only appeared to protect one person, and this person has now entered the capital. Naturally, I don't need to continue to stay in the spiritual state. Jiang Qianqing smiled faintly. Protect who? The old master was surprised. It doesn't matter who it is. What matters is that he has returned to the capital. Jiang Qianqing smiled faintly and said nothing more. He opened a portal and left without looking back. What's the situation? The two elders looked at each other. They had always thought that Jiang Qianqing was a rogue cultivator, but they never expected that he had come with a purpose. Meanwhile, outside the gates of the temple, a golden-haired woman was walking on a wide street. This woman looked to be in her 20s, and she wore a light golden dress. She had a devastatingly beautiful face and a devilish figure. Her skin was like white jade, suffused with a sparkling luster. Her soft, golden, curly hair was like a wave that slowly drifted behind her. Wow, where did this beauty come from? Amazing. She's simply a goddess. When the disciples of the temple saw this woman, they could not help but stop and take a few more glances. Very soon, the woman walked to the bottom of the stone stairs in front of the sacred hall's gate. Immediately, a young man in white ran up to her and said with a smile, Miss, are you here to sign up? I can show you the way. No, thank you. The blonde woman replied politely. The young man in white was puzzled. If you're not here to sign up, Then why are you here? The blonde woman pondered for a while and said, I want to find someone. Who? A man or a woman? The young man in white asked. A man. The blonde woman said. Damn, that bastard's luck is so good. He actually made such a great beauty personally come to find him? The young man in white was indignant. The other men around were also jealous. At this moment, the blonde woman asked, Do you know Qin Feiyang? What? She's here to find Qin Feiyang. Everyone present was greatly shaken. The uneasiness and jealousy in their hearts disappeared. The young man in white asked carefully, May I ask, what's your relationship with senior brother Qin? We, the blonde woman hesitated and said with a smile, we're friends. Everyone's heart trembled. Even if they were just friends, they did not dare to touch them. Back then, Zheng Chuan and Wang Fei had touched Lu Hong. In the end, they were tortured to death by Ruffian Wolf here. That was a lesson in blood. The young man in white's eyes immediately became respectful and said with a flattering smile, Miss, senior brother Qin was indeed in the sacred palace before, but now he has entered the inner hall. Inner hall? The blonde woman was startled and asked doubtfully, Where is the inner hall? The young man in white shook his head and said, I don't know either, because only by becoming a disciple of the sacred palace and breaking through to the War Emperor realm will one be qualified to go to the inner hall. A trace of disappointment crept into the golden-haired woman's alluring eyes. What are you all doing here? Don't you have anything to do? At this moment, a cold shout sounded. A middle-aged man in black stood in the sky. His aura was like a vast ocean, unfathomable. Greetings, Elder Yen. Upon seeing this person, the disciples present all bowed and greeted him. That's right. This person was Yen Nanshan. Do you all think that you're very strong now and don't need to cultivate? If that's the case, then all of you should get out of the sacred palace. Because the sacred palace doesn't need people like you who don't want to improve. Yen Nanshan shouted with a cold face. No, we'll go and cultivate now. The group of disciples' faces changed drastically, and they immediately dispersed. Miss, Elder Yen and senior brother Qin have a good relationship. You can ask him for help. The young man in white whispered to the blonde woman and immediately fled in fear. Because Qin Feiyang and the others' departure was not announced to the public, other than the various big shots, the other people in the continent's capital did not know that Qin Feiyang had left. They thought that he was still in the inner hall. After the disciples left, Yen Nanshan lowered his head and looked at the blonde woman with a trace of surprise in his eyes. This little girl didn't look very old, but she was already a one-star War Emperor. Cough! He coughed and said with a serious face, Miss, this is the sacred palace. Outsiders are not allowed to enter. If you're here to register, then pass the first test. If not, please leave immediately. After saying that, he turned around and left. Senior, wait. The blonde woman hurriedly said, What's the matter? Yen Nanshan stopped and lowered his head to look at the blonde woman. The blonde woman cupped her fists and said, I would like to ask Senior to bring me to see Qin Feiyang. Yen Nanshan was stunned and landed in front of the woman. He frowned and said, Who are you to Feiyang? I'm his friend, the blonde woman said. Friend? Yen Nanshan looked at the blonde woman. He was not the same as the group of disciples just now. He had seen countless people, and he could tell that the woman was not telling the truth from her tone. Yen Nanshan said with a straight face, Leave. Why? The woman suddenly became anxious. Because you're not honest. Yen Nanshan said and pretended to turn around and leave. Senior, I said. Actually, I missed him too much. That's why I came to find him. The woman stammered. Her cheeks were already flushed red by the time she finished speaking. Yen Nanshan was stunned. What kind of relationship was that? This brat sure hit it well. Yen Nanshan cursed in his heart and said with a smile, "Young lady, you're late. Feiyong is already on his way to the capital." The blonde woman's face turned pale. Yan Nanshan said, "If you have anything to say, you can tell me first. I'll pass it on to him when I have the chance." The woman said, "Can't I meet him personally?" Yan Nanshan shook his head. "No, unless you go to the capital too. But that's impossible," the woman said anxiously. "Then what do I have to do to enter the capital?" Yan Nanshan said, "Become an inner palace disciple and pass the Great Nine States competition. However, there are still 10 years until the next Great Nine States competition." 10 years. The blonde woman's face turned paler, and she murmured, "Why didn't he come to see me when he left the spiritual state? Was it really my wishful thinking?" The woman turned around and left with a look of disappointment. However, she stopped after taking 2 steps and lowered her head as if she was struggling with something. Suddenly, she turned around and looked at Yan Nanshan with a determined look in her eyes. "Senior, I want to enter the inner palace." Yan Nanshan looked at her deeply and smiled. "What's your name?" The blonde woman thought for a moment and said, "Senior, just call me Yor." "Okay, follow me." Yan Nanshan nodded and turned to walk up the stone stairs that led to the entrance of the palace. Whoosh! The woman took a deep breath and followed him resolutely. In the passage leading to the teleportation altar, Qin Feiyong and the others were moving as fast as lightning. Suddenly, Qin Feiyong felt a sharp pain in his heart. He immediately stopped and touched his chest. His eyes were filled with bewilderment. This pain came from the concentric knot. At this moment, he could clearly sense the mermaid princess's current emotions. There was disappointment, sadness, and helplessness. He did not understand why the mermaid princess would suddenly have such emotions. Fatso noticed Qin Feiyong's strange behavior and asked suspiciously, "Boss, what's wrong?" Qin Feiyong did not answer, his eyes flickering. "No, I have to go to the Sea of Despair to take a look." He was worried. He was afraid that something would happen to the mermaid princess. But just as he turned around, those strange emotions disappeared again. What's going on? Qin Feiyong was confused. Could it be that the mermaid princess already knew that he was leaving the spiritual state? But that couldn't be. The mermaid princess was in the Sea of Despair, isolated from the world. How could she have received the news? At this moment, the ugly old woman said angrily, "Qin Feiyong, tell me, what are you trying to do? If you don't want to go, just say it." "I'm sorry." Qin Feiyong quickly turned around and apologized. "Don't waste time, let's go." The ugly old woman glanced at him coldly, then turned around and continued to rush forward. Lu Xingqian and the others glanced at Qin Feiyong suspiciously. Then they immediately unleashed their fastest speed and followed after him. Fatso frowned and said, "Boss, what's wrong with you? Why do you look uneasy?" "It's nothing, let's go." Qin Feiyong smiled and chased after Lu Xingqian and the others. Although he didn't know why, from the emotions transmitted by the concentric knot, the mermaid princess's life was not in danger. As long as her life was not in danger, he could leave with peace of mind. Strange. Fatso and Wolf King looked at each other and quickly chased after him. Soon. Chapter 681. Looking at the altar in front of them, everyone was extremely excited, including the ugly old woman, because once they stepped on the altar, it was equivalent to staying in the imperial capital forever. This was a matter that would bring glory to their ancestors. But in the depths of Qin Feiyong's eyes, there was an astonishing, cold light. It had been more than 10 years. He had been looking forward to this day for more than 10 years. Now that he had finally reached this final step, his heart was unable to calm down. And the past hidden in the bottom of his heart also uncontrollably surfaced in his mind. His heart felt as if it was being cut by a knife. Fatso was standing beside Qin Feiyong. He quickly noticed Qin Feiyong's abnormality and quickly reminded him secretly, "Boss, calm down, don't be rash." "I know." Qin Feiyang transmitted his voice. Although his heart was filled with anger, it was not to the extent of losing his mind. Buzz! At the same time, the ugly old woman activated her battle chi and continuously poured it into the teleportation altar. Looking at the awakening altar, Qin Feiyang took a deep breath and secretly said, "Where have you two been fooling around these past few days?" "Outside the city, didn't I tell you?" Seeing Qin Feiyang calm down, Fatso and Wolf King also secretly heaved a sigh of relief. They were afraid that Qin Feiyang would not be able to hold back and directly barge into the imperial palace as soon as he entered the imperial capital. At that time, they were afraid that they would lose their lives before even seeing the emperor. Qin Feiyang frowned. "I'm asking you, what are you doing outside the city?" Fatso laughed. "It's nothing, just fooling around in the mountains with the lion-head eagle and the blood eagle." "Lion-head eagle, blood eagle?" Qin Feiyang was slightly stunned and asked, "The two little friends you mentioned are them?" "That's right. Who else do you think it is?" Fatso and Wolf King nodded. Qin Feiyang looked around, then looked at Ren Wuxuang and asked suspiciously, "Then where are they now? Why don't I see them?" "We're here." "How is it? Isn't it a huge surprise?" Before he finished speaking, Lion-head Eagle and Xue Ying came out from Ren Wuxuang's bosom and laughed mischievously at Qin Feiyang. Qin Feiyang looked at them and was speechless. What kind of surprise was this? Wolf King said telepathically, "Little Qin Zi, this isn't a surprise, but there's something you'll definitely be surprised to hear." "What is it?" Qin Feiyang was suspicious. Wolf King snickered. Lu Xingqian and Shen Mei are together again. What? Qin Feiyang was dumbfounded. Wolf King thought to himself, Big Bro and Fatso saw it with our own eyes and heard it with our own ears. It can't be fake. When did this happen? Qin Feiyang frowned. It was 7 days ago that night. However, now it's just Lu Xingqian who is pursuing Shen Mei unilaterally. Shen Mei hasn't agreed yet. Wolf King said. Qin Feiyang glanced at Lu Xingqian and Shen Mei's backs and said telepathically, "I don't think Shen Mei will agree. After all, Lu Xingqian once hurt her." "Not necessarily. That night we saw with our own eyes that he knelt in front of Shen Mei and begged her to forgive him. And now Lu Xingqian is very good at dealing with women. I guess Shen Mei will return to his arms soon." Fatso sneered. "He actually knelt?" Qin Feiyang was dumbfounded. After all, now Lu Xingqian was a person with strong self-esteem. Even if a knife was put to his neck, he might not be able to force him to kneel. Could it be that this person really liked Shen Mei? Of course, if this person really liked Shen Mei, it could be considered a good thing. But he was afraid that Lu Xingqian would want to use her to do some shady business. After all, this was a person with a criminal record. It seemed that he had to find time to talk to Ren Wuxuang about this matter and let her remind Shen Mei to avoid another tragedy. At this time, with a low buzzing sound, the transmission altar was completely activated. "Let's go," the ugly old woman called out and took the lead to jump onto the transmission altar. Lu Xingqian and the others followed closely behind. Qin Feiyang also temporarily put aside the matter of Shen Mei and Lu Xingqian and jumped onto the altar. Fatso and Wolf King also rushed up. Immediately, the group of figures quickly faded. In the end, as if evaporating into thin air, they disappeared without a trace. The light of the transmission altar also quickly dimmed. The capital, in a sealed space, this space was more than 1,000 feet long. 9 blood-red altars were neatly arranged on the ground, exuding an ancient and mysterious aura. Next to the 9 altars, there was a black stone tablet with different words engraved on it. Lingzhou, Fengzhou, Hezhou, Yuzhou, and so on. At this moment, a group of people gathered next to these altars. Most of them were familiar faces to Qin Feiyang. There was Wan Qiu. There was Tan Wu. There was Zhao Yu. Ling Yu, Feng Ranran Luodan. There was also Feng Wuxie and the twin sisters. But they didn't say anything. They lowered their heads and thought about their own matters. Next to them there were 5 old men. These 5 people didn't say anything. They all closed their eyes as if they were recuperating from their injuries. The aura they exuded was unfathomable. Suddenly, Wan Qiu raised his head and glanced at the crowd. He said impatiently, "How long do we have to wait?" "When everyone is here, someone will naturally come to pick us up," one of the old men said calmly. He didn't open his eyes when he spoke. "Everyone is here, except for the Lingzhou. They're really dawdling." Wan Qiu snorted. Zhao Yu snorted. "It's not like we're in a hurry to reincarnate. What are you in a hurry for?" Wan Qiu raised his eyebrows and looked at Zhao Yu. "Did I say anything about you? Why are you talking so much nonsense?" Whoever talks the most nonsense knows best. Zhao Yu smiled disdainfully. A cold glint flashed across Wan Qiu's eyes. Buzz! At this moment, one of the altars shone brightly. Following that, figures appeared one after another. It was Qin Feiyang and the others. The group jumped off the altar one after another. The ugly old woman looked at the 5 old men and cupped her hands with a smile. "Sorry to have kept you waiting." The 5 of them finally opened their eyes and rays of light burst out. One of the old men glanced at Qin Feiyang and the others, then looked at the ugly old woman and said unhappily, "Why do you people from the Lingzhou always take so long to do things?" Something came up at the last minute. "Sorry." The ugly old woman smiled apologetically and didn't forget to glare at Qin Feiyang. She was obviously blaming him. Qin Feiyang smiled embarrassedly and looked at the 5 old men. His pupils shrank slightly. The aura of these 5 people was almost on par with the ugly old woman. Obviously, they were the previous masters of Hezhou, Yuzhou, Fengzhou, Yuzhou, and Kongzhou. The 5 old men were also sizing up Qin Feiyang, as if they wanted to see through him. But in the end, they could only see through Qin Feiyang's cultivation. As for the rest, they couldn't see anything. It felt like there was a mysterious veil covering Qin Feiyang's body. Then, the 5 of them withdrew their gazes in disappointment and continued to chat with the ugly old woman. At the same time, Ling Yu and the other 3 also went forward and chatted with Qin Feiyang and the others. As for Wan Qiu, Feng Wuxie, and the other 2, they looked at Qin Feiyang and the others with sharp gaze. As for Tan Wu, he didn't greet anyone or say a word, seeming a little lonely. While chatting, Qin Feiyang looked around. It was fine if he didn't look, but when he looked, his eyes were filled with surprise. This place looked so familiar. It felt like he had been here not long ago. He thought carefully for a moment and suddenly had a flash of inspiration. He remembered. It was the illusion of the Bridge of Helplessness. Back then, in the illusion, he had been to a place called the Pagoda, and the space on the first floor of the pagoda, be it the size or layout, was exactly the same as here. The things in the illusion were the same as the real world. This made Qin Feiyang feel incredulous. He even wondered if the pagoda really existed and this place was the pagoda. Clang! Suddenly, a loud explosion jolted Qin Feiyang awake. He turned to look. There was a stone door in front of him. At this moment, the stone door was slowly opening and rays of sunlight shone in through the gap. Through the gap, one could vaguely see a person standing outside the door. At this moment, everyone quietened down and looked at the stone door that was opening. As the gap between the stone door grew larger, the person standing outside the stone door gradually entered everyone's sight. When he saw that person's face clearly, Qin Feiyang felt like a bolt out of the blue and his mind rumbled. It was an old man. He was wearing a pure white robe and had white hair and a white beard. He exuded an otherworldly aura. Qin Feiyang had seen this person before. It was the old man who guarded the pagoda in the illusion. When the stone door was completely opened, the ugly old woman and the others immediately walked to the old man and bowed. Greetings, old Qin. They looked extremely respectful. Even the way they address him is the same. Qin Feiyang frowned. He remembered that in the illusion, Qin Zhong and Qin Yi also called this old man Old Qin. Yes. Old Qin nodded and looked past the ugly old woman and the others to Qin Feiyang and the others. When they made eye contact with old Qin, Qin Feiyang and the others felt as if they had fallen into a bottomless abyss and couldn't help but feel cold all over. The ugly old woman shouted, "What are you all doing there? Hurry up and salute old Qin. Greetings, old Qin." Everyone quivered and bowed, respectfully one after another. Old Qin glanced at them one by one and suddenly locked his eyes on Qin Feiyang. Qin Feiyang's heart trembled. Could it be that he had seen through his identity? If the illusion was really the same as the real world, then this was the back mountain of the imperial palace, and this old Qin, as a member of the imperial palace, must know what he looked like when he was young. So, his heart was in his throat. Old Qin looked at Qin Feiyang for a moment and asked, "You are the Qin Feiyang who killed everyone in the 9 underworlds?" "That's me." Qin Feiyang nodded and secretly breathed a sigh of relief. It seemed that he hadn't been discovered. "The 2 palace lords of the spiritual state have praised you, saying that you have great talent and are a rare talent. But being talented doesn't give you the right to be arrogant. This old man has a piece of advice for you. You'd better behave when you come to the capital, because this place has no lack of powerhouses and geniuses." Old Qin said. The 2 mansion lords he was referring to were naturally the old man and the ugly old woman. Qin Feiyang frowned slightly and said, "Thank you for your advice, old Qin. I will remember it." Wan Qiu looked at Qin Feiyang gloatingly. "This is the price of being arrogant. Let's see if you dare to be arrogant in the future." But then, old Qin suddenly looked at Wan Qiu and sized him up and asked, "You are Wan Qiu?" "Yes, I am." Wan Qiu hurriedly replied, respectfully. Old Qin said, "Do you feel good seeing Qin Feiyang being taught a lesson?" Wan Qiu's expression froze, and he quickly shook his head. "I don't." "You better not. Although Qin Feiyang is arrogant, no one says that he isn't good at anything else. As for you, you started rumors and created trouble to frame Qin Feiyang. Your intentions are worthy of death." If this had happened in the imperial capital, you would have been dead long ago. Old Qin said expressionlessly. Hearing this, Wan Qiu was so scared that he broke out in a cold sweat. He nodded repeatedly and said, "Old Qin is right. I promise that I won't do it again. This time." On the other hand, Qin Feiyang and the others looked at him gloatingly. The saying that evil people have their own retribution was true. Old Qin glanced at Wan Qiu coldly and said, "Come out." Immediately, a group of people came out in a line. Outside, there was a small square paved with black stones. There were traces of severe weathering. It was obvious that it had been there for many years. Everyone stood in the square and curiously looked around. On all sides, there was an endless mountain range. The mountains rose and fell, and the ancient trees towered into the sky. In the mountain stream, one could also sense countless terrifying auras. This was the aura of a fierce beast. Moreover, it was not a normal kind of terror. Every aura made them feel the threat of death. One must know, they were all war masters. Just the aura alone made them feel this way. One could imagine how terrifying the strength of the fierce beasts lurking in the mountain stream was. After Qin Feiyang came out, he immediately turned around and looked behind him. Immediately, he was dumbfounded. In front of him, there was a huge ancient pagoda. It was dark all over and exuded an ancient aura. On the front of the ancient pagoda, there were 2 majestic words engraved on it. Pagoda! Sure enough, it was the same as in the illusion. Fatso saw Qin Feiyang staring at the pagoda, and also looked at it suspiciously and sent a sound transmission. "Boss, what's so good about this pagoda?" Qin Feiyang said, There's nothing good about this pagoda, but this place should be the back mountain of the imperial palace. What? Fatso's gaze trembled as he scanned the surrounding mountains and rivers. He really didn't expect that the entrance would be located in the back mountain of the imperial palace. No, Fatso said again. Why would you say that it should be? Could it be that you can't be sure? N. The back mountain is the forbidden area of the imperial palace. I never came here when I was young, but last time in the illusion of the Bridge of Helplessness, I came here. Qin Feiyong thought. Illusion? Fatso was stunned and said disdainfully, Boss, is there something wrong with your head? You even believe in the illusion? Qin Feiyong said, The problem is, everything here is exactly the same as in the illusion. There's such a thing? Fatso was extremely surprised. Illusions were all illusions. Normally speaking, they would not match with the real world. But the illusion that Qin Feiyong saw was exactly the same as the one here, which was unbelievable. At this time, Old Man Qin closed the stone door of the pagoda, opened another teleportation gate, and said, There's nothing to see. Hurry up and register at the temple. Temple? Chapter 682. Soon, a group of people descended in front of a stone staircase. The stone staircase was more than 10 meters wide and more than 20 meters high. There were about 50 to 60 steps, and it was filled with an ancient aura. And on top of the stone staircase, there was a stone tablet. The stone tablet was more than 10 meters tall, and it was completely white as if it was made of white jade. There were 2 big words engraved on it, Temple. These 2 words were like iron hooks and silver strokes, exuding a majestic aura. Behind the stone tablet, there were many magnificent halls. Some were tens of meters tall, some were hundreds of meters tall, and some were even towering into the clouds. This is the temple. Everyone glanced at the buildings, and their eyes were filled with curiosity, including Fatso and Wolf King. Only Qin Feiyong didn't have the slightest ripple. After all, he was born in the imperial capital, and he wasn't unfamiliar with the temple. Fatso asked secretly, Boss, do you know what this temple is for? What else can it be for? It's nothing more than the same as the temple, cultivating talents to serve the great Qin Empire. Qin Feiyong transmitted his voice, and there was a trace of disdain in his tone. I see, Fatso muttered and said again, Then is the temple also divided into the martial arts hall and the Dan hall? Definitely. Qin Feiyong nodded. Then is there a spiritual power restriction? Fatso asked. The Dan hall of the temple had a spiritual power restriction, and only those who had reached level 5 of spiritual power could enter. I don't know about that. Qin Feiyong shook his head. Fatso was stunned and said in surprise, You're not from the imperial capital. How can you not know? Must I know if I'm from the imperial capital? Qin Feiyong rolled his eyes at him. Actually, the temple had a very high status in the imperial capital, because the master behind the temple was the current emperor. Therefore, even the children of the feudal lords would fight to enter the temple. Even the princes of the imperial palace would enter the temple. However, Qin Feiyong was different at that time. First, although all the princes were the children of emperors, Qin Feiyong was lucky to have an empress as his mother. It was common knowledge. The status of celestial empress would be higher than those concubines in the imperial harem. As such, at that time, Qin Feiyong's position in the imperial palace was also higher than the other princes. Second, at that time, Qin Feiyong was deeply favored by the emperor. The emperor often taught him cultivation, personally, so there was no need for him to enter the temple. Or rather, even if he wanted to enter the temple at that time, the emperor and empress would not allow it. Therefore, Qin Feiyong only had a general understanding of the temple. As for the details, he had no idea. Of course, in the past he had disdained to inquire about these things. Da-da. Suddenly, the sound of steady and powerful footsteps came from the top of the stone stairs. Soon, a middle-aged man in black entered the line of sight of Qin Feiyang and the others. This burly man was about 9 meters tall and had bulging muscles all over his body. He was filled with a wild aura. Seeing this person, everyone's pupils shrank, because they could not see through this person's cultivation at all. At the same time, the burly man also lowered his head and looked at Qin Feiyang and the others. There was no expression on his rough face. No one knew what he was thinking. Dong Jingyang looked at the black-robed old woman and said in a low voice, "Senior, do you know who he is?" "I don't know." The black-robed old woman shook her head. Without knowing the other party's identity, she did not know how to address him. Therefore, for a moment, the ugly old woman and the others were also at a loss. The middle-aged man suddenly said, "Are you people from the 9 great regions?" His voice was very loud and clear, shaking everyone's eardrums. Yes. The ugly old woman and the others nodded respectfully. The middle-aged man said, "My name is Yu Ming, the law enforcing elder of the Temple Law Enforcement Hall. I am here to pick you up." "Greetings, Elder Yu Ming." The 6 of them immediately bowed. Qin Feiyang and the others also bowed in greeting. "Follow me," Yu Ming said lightly, then turned and left. The ugly old woman and the others led Qin Feiyang and the others up the stone stairs in a hurry. Wolf King asked suspiciously, "Little Qin Zi, what is the Law Enforcement Hall?" "The Law Enforcement Hall exists to maintain the order of the temple," Qin Feiyang said. The number of disciples in the temple was uncountable. Therefore, in order to maintain the order of the temple set up a law enforcement hall. And each person in the law enforcement hall was very powerful. Moreover, they controlled the life and death of the disciples of the temple. They even dared to kill the children of the feudal lords. Therefore, their status in the temple was very high, and they were also the most feared existence of the disciples of the temple. "I'll go." They even dared to kill the children of the feudal lords. Fatso and Wolf King were stunned. They have such power because the law enforcement hall is directly under the jurisdiction of the temple master, and the temple master is the state preceptor. Qin Feiyang said. "State preceptor?" Fatso was puzzled. The state preceptor is the person with the highest status in the great Qin Empire, except for the emperor and the empress. Moreover, he is the master of the current emperor. Qin Feiyang said. "The master of the emperor." Fatso and Wolf King looked at each other, their eyes full of shock. Wolf King asked, "Is this state preceptor stronger than the current emperor?" "I don't know. This state preceptor is very mysterious and he is elusive. I only saw him once when I was a child." Qin Feiyang shook his head. Fatso said, "Fat Lord is sure that this person's strength must have reached the level of heaven and earth, and he is likely to be an obstacle to your revenge in the future. If he really dares to meddle in other people's business, then I won't show mercy." Qin Feiyang sneered. Heard. Fatso and Wolf King couldn't help but shake their heads and laugh. They had never doubted Qin Feiyang's ability, although he was definitely not a match for this state preceptor now. In the future, he would be able to trample this person under his feet sooner or later. Fatso said, "Boss, the law enforcement hall is so terrifying. It should be very difficult to enter the law enforcement hall." I don't dare to say how difficult it is. But as far as I know, the number of people in the law enforcement hall has always been limited to 99. Plus the hall master of the law enforcement hall. It's exactly 100. Qin Feiyang said. Fatso said, "In other words, even if you are qualified, you can't enter the law enforcement hall." "Yes, unless someone in the law enforcement hall dies." Qin Feiyang nodded. "Dies? I'm afraid not. After all, this is the imperial capital. Who dares to touch them?" Fatso shook his head and said. During the conversation, the group had already climbed up the stone stairs, and a square entered their sight. The square was very big, but it was empty. It was especially cold and cheerless. On the opposite side of the square sat an ancient hall. The great hall was about 10 meters tall and was completely pitch black. Through the door, one could vaguely see a white-haired old man sitting inside. Yu Ming led them straight into the great hall. The layout of the hall was also quite simple. There was only a desk and 2 chairs. As for the white-haired old man, he was sitting at the desk, dozing off with his eyes closed. Yu Ming walked to the table, knocked on the table, and said, "Old man, someone is here, register them." The white-haired old man slowly opened his eyes, looked at Yu Ming, then looked at Qin Feiyang and the others and said indifferently, "Report your name and cultivation." The ugly old woman asked, "Do we want it too?" "Nonsense. If you don't tell me your name, how can I register you? And how can I give you an identity token?" The white-haired old man said without raising his head, his tone somewhat impatient, "Zhu Yu, 9 Star War sect." The ugly old woman hurriedly said, "What?" Qin Feiyang, Fatso, and Wolf King's eyes all trembled. He never thought that this old witch would actually be a 9 Star War sect. She was only 1 step away from becoming a war saint. At the same time, the white-haired old man took out a white token from the drawer under the desk. Next, the white-haired old man's fingertips surged with battle chi as he waved the token a few times. Then he threw the token onto the table and said, "Next." The ugly old woman consciously stepped forward and grabbed the white token. Then she retreated to the side and looked at the token in her hand with an excited expression, because as long as she obtained this identity token, she would be able to stay in the imperial capital forever. The previous palace masters of He Prefecture, Yu Prefecture, Feng Prefecture, Kong Prefecture, and Yu Prefecture also stepped forward one after another and received their respective identity tokens. Moreover, they were all 9 Star War sect. Next, it was Qin Feiyang and the others' turn. Qin Feiyang was not in a hurry, and first let Lu Xingqian and the others receive their identity tokens. About 100 breaths passed. Everyone had gotten it. Only Qin Feiyang and Wolf King were left. Qin Feiyang, 1 Star War sect. Qin Feiyang consciously walked forward. The white-haired old man didn't ask anything and directly gave the identity token to Qin Feiyang. Following that, the white-haired old man closed his eyes and began to doze off. Wolf King frowned and asked, "Where is brother's identity token?" "There are no berserk beasts." The white-haired old man replied indifferently. Wolf King said angrily, "Damn, you are looking down on us berserk beasts." "Shwa!" The white-haired old man suddenly opened his eyes, and 2 cold rays of light shot out. At this moment, not only Wolf King, even Qin Feiyang and the others felt as if they had fallen into hell. They couldn't help but feel goosebumps all over their bodies. Even the ugly old woman and the others were the same. But very quickly, the white-haired old man closed his eyes again. Qin Feiyang immediately glared at Wolf King fiercely and said angrily in his heart, "This is not the sacred palace. Behave yourself." "Got it." The Wolf King pursed its lips, feeling a lingering fear. The old man in front of him looked very ordinary. There was no aura on his body, but it was obvious that he had hidden his cultivation. Yu Ming also looked at Wolf King meaningfully and asked, "Are there any alchemists among you?" The ugly old woman nodded and said, "Yes, Qin Feiyang is." Then next, alchemists report to the Dan Hall. Martial artists report to the Martial Arts Hall. Remember, in the sacred palace, disciples are strictly prohibited from fighting in private. Otherwise, regardless of right or wrong, they will be punished. Yu Ming said, "Disciple will remember." Everyone replied respectfully, "Best remember." Yu Ming glanced at the few of them and said, his tone carrying a hint of warning, "Finished." With a wave of his hand, he took the ugly old woman and the others and disappeared without a trace. They left just like that? Qin Feiyang and the others looked at each other in dismay. Leaving them here, just like that. Wasn't this person too irresponsible? Shouldn't he at least tell them the location of the martial arts hall and the Dan hall? What should we do? Zhao Yu asked. Everyone was at a loss of what to do. Luo Dan pointed at the white-haired old man sitting at the desk and said softly, "Should we ask him?" "I don't dare." Feng Ranran shook her head. Ling Yu gritted his teeth and said, "I'll ask." But before Ling Yu could speak, the white-haired old man said, "Go and find it yourself. If you can't even find the martial arts hall and the Dan hall, it means that you are too stupid. Our sacred palace doesn't welcome idiots." Heard. Everyone couldn't help but show a hint of anger in their eyes. After all, they were the best in the 9 prefectures. Not only did they not have anyone to guide them, but they were also criticized like that. Wasn't this too much? Chapter 683. Get out! The white-haired old man shouted impatiently. Let's go! Qin Feiyang took a deep breath and secretly called out to Fatso and Wolf King. Then he turned and walked out of the main hall to the plaza. After Fatso came out, he complained, "Boss, this temple is too much. They don't even put us in their eyes." That's the reality. No matter how outstanding you are in the 9 prefectures, you're just an insignificant character in the imperial capital. If you want to gain the respect of others, prove it with your actions. Qin Feiyang transmitted his voice. Fatso pursed his lips and said, "Anyway, this imperial capital gave Fat Lord a bad impression." Wolf King said, "I also hate this place a little." Qin Feiyang rolled his eyes and said indifferently, "I told you not to come, but you insisted. Since you're here, just bear with it." At this moment, Lu Xingqian and the others also walked out of the main hall. Ling Yu sighed and said, "I didn't expect us, the geniuses of the 9 prefectures, to be reduced to such a state." The others also looked indignant. But what could they do? They had to lower their heads when they were under someone else's roof. After calming down, Wan Qiu, Feng Wuxia, and the twin sisters glanced at Qin Feiyang and the others and left first. Looking at the backs of the 4 people, Qin Feiyang frowned slightly. He felt that he had missed something, but he couldn't remember what he had missed. Lu Xingqian transmitted his voice and smiled. "Brother Qin, you should know the location of the martial arts hall and the pill hall, right?" "I don't know." Qin Feiyang shook his head. Lu Xingqian was stunned. As a prince of the great Qin Empire, how could he not know the layout of the temple? Qin Feiyang didn't explain. He turned to Tan Wu and said with a smile, "Brother Tan, we'll be brothers in the same sect in the future. Please take care of me." Tan Wu didn't answer and looked at him warily. Qin Feiyang couldn't help laughing. Shua! At this moment, a figure flashed across the void above. Qin Feiyang looked up and flew up into the sky. He called out, "Senior Marshal Brother, please wait." Obviously, he was going to ask for directions. Lu Xingqian and the others looked at each other, then followed suit and flew into the air. In the meantime, the black figure stopped in the air and turned to look at Qin Feiyang and the others. It was a young man who looked to be about 25 or 26 years old. He was about 1.8 meters tall and wore a fitting black robe. His temperament was quite extraordinary. However, the aura this person exuded wasn't very strong. He was only a 2-star battle ancestor. However, there was a very eye-catching white symbol on his chest. The symbol was a small sword. When Qin Feiyang's group approached, the black-clothed youth glanced at the chest area of Qin Feiyang's group and asked, "Are you new here?" Qin Feiyang nodded. Seeing Qin Feiyang nod, the black-clothed youth revealed a trace of disdain. Qin Feiyang naturally saw it, but he didn't care. He cupped his hands and smiled. "May I ask, Senior Marshal Brother, how do I get to the martial arts hall and the pill hall?" "You really don't know." Lu Xingqian frowned slightly. He originally thought that Qin Feiyang was joking with him. The black-clothed youth didn't answer. He glanced at Qin Feiyang's group and paused for a while on Ren Wuxuang and Xinmei. At the same time, an undetectable light flashed in his eyes. The black-clothed youth smiled and said, "Coincidentally, I'm also going back to the martial arts hall. You guys can go with me." "Thank you, senior martial brother." Ling Yu cupped his hands and smiled. The black-clothed youth smiled faintly and said, "We're all from the same sect. Why are you so polite? Let's go." Immediately, the group followed behind the black-clothed youth and flew towards the depths of the divine palace. "All right, let me introduce myself. My name is Xing Wanli. I'm also a disciple of the martial arts hall." The black-clothed youth smiled and said, "Qin Feiyang said, Qin Feiyang of the spiritual state." Spiritual state? Xing Wanli was stunned and asked in confusion, "Why haven't I heard of a place called the spiritual state in the imperial capital?" Qin Feiyang smiled faintly and said, "Not the imperial capital. It's one of the 9 states, the spiritual state." "So it's that place." Xing Wanli suddenly realized and asked, "You guys are all from the 9 states?" Qin Feiyang nodded. This time, the disdain between Xing Wanli's brows became even stronger. Looking at this person's expression, everyone was very unhappy but chose to endure it. After all, they were new here and it was better to keep a low profile. Ling Yu said, "Senior martial brother Xing, can you tell us about the Divine Palace?" "Of course. Our Divine Palace is composed of 7 major halls. They are the Elixir Hall, Martial Arts Hall, Resource Hall, Deacon Hall, Law Enforcement Hall, War God Hall, and the Martial Arts Treasury." Xing Wanli said. Fatso asked, "What is the War God Hall?" The others were also confused. Everyone knew about the Elixir Hall, Martial Arts Hall, Resource Hall, Deacon Hall, Law Enforcement Hall, and Martial Arts Treasury. Only this War God Hall. I'm not very clear about the specific situation of the War God Hall, but I heard that the War God Hall is a very terrifying place. The people inside are basically old monsters who have lived for thousands of years. Of course, there are also some young people, but without exception, any one of them is an existence that can crush all the geniuses in the imperial capital. Xing Wanli said with awe in his eyes. Old monsters who have lived for thousands of years? Everyone looked at each other with shock in their hearts. Xing Wanli said again, "Have you heard of the Crown Prince?" "No." Ling Yu and the others shook their heads. However, Qin Feiyang raised his eyebrows subtly. "I knew you guys haven't heard of him." Xing Wanli looked at Qin Feiyang and the others indifferently and said, "The Crown Prince is the son of the current emperor and the Crown Prince of the Empire. But even so, he isn't qualified to enter the War God Hall." Everyone's heart trembled. Even the Crown Prince wasn't qualified to enter. What kind of existence was the War God Hall? Don't think so much, because you guys will never be able to enter the War God Hall in your lifetime. Apart from these, our War God Hall has 2 very famous rankings. They are the Alchemy God ranking and the Martial God ranking. These 2 rankings only have 10 places. Those who can enter the rankings are the most outstanding geniuses among the disciples of our War God Hall. They are also the strongest among the disciples of our generation. So in the future, when you meet these people on the rankings, you better be honest. Of course, maybe you won't see them in your lifetime. Xing Wanli said. Why? Everyone was puzzled. Because they are all monstrous geniuses, standing at the peak of the War God Hall's disciples. They never show their faces in front of others. Xing Wanli said. Alchemy God ranking, Martial God ranking, hearing about it. Everyone's heart was filled with desire. However, Qin Feiyang kept his head down, a sharp light flashing in his eyes. Next, Xing Wanli said a lot more about the War God Hall. But Qin Feiyang didn't listen to a single word. About an hour passed. In the distance, a huge object entered everyone's sight. It was a palace, completely black, occupying dozens of miles, towering into the clouds. From afar, it looked like a ferocious beast lurking there, emitting a shocking aura. That is the martial arts hall. Our martial arts hall has 1,000,000 disciples, so this hall is the largest and most spectacular building in the entire imperial capital. Xing Wanli introduced. So many. Once again, everyone was deeply shocked. All the war god halls in the 9 prefectures, added together, didn't even have a fifth of the number here. Xing Wanli continued, and these 1,000,000 disciples are all war masters. Boom! As soon as these words came out, everyone felt like a bolt from the blue. Their bodies and minds trembled, and their minds rumbled. 1,000,000 war masters' disciples. How was this possible? One had to know that in the 9 prefectures, any war master could be called a king. Take the spiritual state, for example. All the war masters, including the old man and Wang Hong, probably didn't exceed 30. But here, just the martial arts hall alone had more than 1,000,000 battle sect members. What if the elixir hall was added? What if the assignment hall and the law enforcement hall were added? If the scope was expanded and the war masters in the imperial capital were added, this number was simply unimaginable. It was no wonder that it was so difficult for people from the 9 prefectures to enter the imperial capital, because the imperial capital didn't lack experts at all. It was only now that they realized the reality. These so-called monsters of the 9 prefectures were nothing in the War God Hall. They were dispensable, and here the number of War God Hall disciples they met had also increased. But for the dozen or so unfamiliar faces like Qin Feiyang, even if they brushed past him, no one gave him a second glance. They were extremely cold. Swish! A moment later, a group of people followed Xing Wanli and landed on the plaza in front of the martial arts hall. There were even more people coming and going in the plaza, but they were all in a hurry, giving off a cold and unsociable feeling. Every disciple of the War God Hall wants to become an expert in the limelight, so we usually don't wander around outside. If we have time, we will cultivate. And those who come out basically have something to do. Xing Wanli said. Everyone nodded in realization. It seemed like the competition here wasn't ordinary. Xing Wanli said, "Let's go. I will bring you to report to the assignment elder. He will arrange a cultivation room for you." At this moment, Lu Xingqian asked, "Senior Brother Xing, how do we get to the Pill Hall?" And Xing Wanli was stunned. He looked at Lu Xingqian and asked, "You are an alchemist?" Lu Xingqian nodded. Xing Wanli was surprised, but he didn't have much reaction. He turned and pointed in the opposite direction and said, "Do you see that big hall? That is the Pill Hall. It is opposite our martial arts hall." Everyone looked over. There was a huge, ancient pagoda in the distance. It was slightly smaller than the martial arts hall, but it was still as tall as the clouds. Xing Wanli said, "The Pill Hall isn't far from here. You can go there yourself." "All right." Lu Xingqian nodded. "The rest of you follow me." Xing Wanli waved his hand and walked towards the martial arts hall's entrance. Tan Wu looked at Qin Feiyang cautiously and followed closely. Ling Yu and the other 3, Dong Zhenyang, Shen Mei, and Ran Wushuang, looked at Qin Feiyang suspiciously. Why was this guy so absent-minded throughout the journey? But they didn't ask much. Ling Yu cupped his hands and smiled. "Brother Qin, let's meet again when we have time." Qin Feiyang nodded. He looked at Shen Mei and Ren Wushuang and reminded them, "You have to be careful of that Xing Wanli." "Why?" The 2 ladies were surprised. Qin Feiyang whispered, "When this person looked at you, his eyes were a little strange. I'm worried that he has bad intentions. I noticed it too. I even feel that he is leading the way for the 2 of you." Lu Xingqian said thoughtfully, "It can't be, right?" Shan Mei and Ren Wushuang looked at each other. Qin Feiyang smiled and said, "Anyway, it's never wrong to be cautious." The 2 ladies nodded. Ren Wushuang said, Then we will be leaving. If there is anything, send us a message. N. Qin Feiyang nodded. He waved his hand and smiled. Go! Chapter 684. High up in the sky, Lu Xingqian whispered, Brother Qin, are you thinking about the first prince? Qin Feiyang lowered his head in silence. Fatso pursed his lips. What's there to think about the first prince? Lu Xingqian said, Didn't you hear what Xing Wanli said just now? The first prince is now the crown prince. Crown prince? Fatso raised his eyebrows. Moreover, the first prince must have received the emperor's approval as the crown prince and even announced it to the world. Otherwise, Xing Wanli wouldn't have dared to say it in front of us. Lu Xingqian added. Fatso looked at Qin Feiyang with concern. Boss, are you okay? If you're unhappy, we'll find a chance to kill the first prince. Wolf King's eyes flashed coldly. Hearing this, Lu Xingqian immediately staggered and almost fell from the sky. I didn't pull you in. What are you afraid of? Wolf King rolled his eyes. Lu Xingqian was speechless. Do you know what it means to be the crown prince? You're actually planning to murder him. I have to say you're really audacious. What's the big deal? Wolf King curled his lips in disdain. Sigh, you're thinking too simply. The concept of a crown prince and a prince is completely different. If the first prince was still a prince, killing him wouldn't have much of an impact. But a crown prince is different. A crown prince is the future heir to the throne. Killing him is equivalent to going against the entire Great Qin Empire. However, at this point, Lu Xingqian changed the topic and said telepathically, If you really plan to kill him, count me in. Fatso and Wolf King were stunned. Qin Feiyang also looked up at Lu Xingqian, his eyes filled with disbelief. Lu Xingqian smiled faintly. To be honest, other than you, Qin Feiyang, I want to kill everyone from your Qin clan. Why? Do you have a grudge against the Qin clan? Qin Feiyang frowned. I'm not from the capital. Why would I have a grudge against the Qin clan? I just can't stand their high and mighty attitude. Lu Xingqian smiled faintly. Qin Feiyang narrowed his eyes slightly. This reason was too far-fetched and not the least bit convincing. However, Wolf King and Fatso chose to support Lu Xingqian because they couldn't stand it either. Fatso snickered. Why else would we do it? Nonsense. Qin Feiyang glared at him fiercely and said in a deep voice, Do you think we have the ability to go against the entire Great Qin Empire? Wolf King said disdainfully, What are you afraid of? As long as we do it cleanly, who would know it was us? We'll talk about this later. After everything is settled, help me find out when the emperor appointed the first prince as the crown prince. Also, find out the first prince's current whereabouts and cultivation level, as well as all the major events that happened in the capital in the past 10 years. Qin Feiyang transmitted his voice. Fatso patted his chest and said, It's a piece of cake. Leave it to Fat Lord. During the conversation, the 3 men and 1 wolf arrived in front of the ancient pagoda. There was also a plaza in front of the pagoda. The people here were also in a hurry. As for their attire, it was similar to the sacred hall. The disciples of the martial arts hall wore black, while the disciples of the pill hall wore white. At the entrance of the ancient pagoda, there was a small, transparent window. Through the window, they could clearly see a white-clothed old man sitting inside. The 3 men and 1 wolf walked to the window and saw the old man sitting in front of a desk with his head lowered. What was he writing? Qin Feiyang said, Elder, we are the new disciples. We are here to report. The white-clothed old man raised his head and looked at the 3 of them. He took out 3 chinkuan bags and threw them on the window. Then he looked away and continued with his work. The 3 of them looked at each other and grabbed a chinkuan bag each. In the end, there was nothing but dozens of clothes. Lu Xingqian asked suspiciously, Elder, don't we need to test our mental strength? No need. It's fine as long as you are alchemists. As for the alchemy room, go and find it yourself. After the white-clothed old man finished speaking, he waved his hand impatiently. The three of them were tactful and didn't ask any more questions. They turned and entered the ancient pagoda. Are the people of the divine hall all so arrogant? But as soon as they entered the ancient pagoda, Fatso couldn't help but say angrily, They have the right to be arrogant. What can you do about it? But the elixir palace here is quite humane. At least there is no restriction on the level of mental strength. Otherwise, with your level 5 mental strength, you wouldn't even be able to enter the main door, let alone have an independent alchemy room. Lu Xingqian said, TSK, who cares about the alchemy room here? Fatso looked ahead with disdain. In front of them was a quiet corridor. The corridor extended in all directions and led to the deepest part. On both sides of the corridor, there was a heavy stone door every 3 meters. Obviously, the alchemy room was behind these stone doors. Wolf King rolled his eyes and asked, Little Qin Zi, what grade do you think the alchemy fire here is? Qin Feiyang thought for a while and said, The alchemy fire in the inner palace is all grade 4. The alchemy fire here should be at least grade 5. Inner palace? Are you from the 9 prefectures? Suddenly, a suspicious voice sounded behind them. The three of them turned around and saw a young man in white walking in from the outside. This person was about 175 meters tall. He had a dignified appearance, a tall and straight figure, and an extraordinary temperament. His strength was also not bad. He was a 3-star battle grandmaster. Lu Xingqian said, Senior brother, do you know about the 9 prefectures? The young man in white smiled and said, Of course, I also came from the 9 prefectures. What a coincidence! Lu Xingqian was surprised. He cupped his hands and smiled. It's an honor to meet an old friend in a foreign land. It's an honor to meet you. The young man in white also cupped his hands and smiled. May I ask which prefecture you 3 brothers are from? Lu Xingqian said, The spiritual prefecture. What about you? The young man in white smiled and said, It's really an honor to meet an old friend in a foreign land. I'm from the Cloud Prefecture. I entered the imperial capital during the last 9 prefectures tournament. Cloud Prefecture? Qin Feiyang and Fatso frowned slightly. Although the spiritual prefecture and the Cloud Prefecture were the closest among the 9 prefectures, they didn't have a good impression of the Cloud Prefecture. Fatso said, May I know your name, senior brother? The young man in white said, Mo Dong. Your surname is Mo? Fatso's pupils constricted, and he smiled. Then what's your relationship with the Mo family of the Cloud Prefecture? The young man in white smiled and said, You know about the Mo family too. I'm from the Mo family. What? Fatso was dumbfounded. There was someone from the Mo family in the imperial capital? Enemies were bound to meet on a narrow road. Fatso pondered for a moment and asked tentatively, What's your relationship with Mo Wuxian? Wuxian, he's my cousin. Actually, I came out this time to pick him up. Mo Dong said. Fatso asked suspiciously, You know that he passed the 9 prefectures tournament? I don't know. It's impossible to communicate between the imperial capital and the 9 prefectures through the image crystal. The teleportation gate can't teleport either. That's why I've never contacted him in the past 10 years in the imperial capital. However, before I entered the imperial capital, he told me that he would participate in the 9 prefectures tournament this time. And with his strength, I believe that he can win. So, I calculated the time and waited outside. But after waiting for a few days, I didn't see him come. And just now, when I heard you talking about the inner hall, I knew that you are from the 9 prefectures. Because only the sacred halls of the 9 prefectures have inner halls, I wanted to ask you. Mo Dong said, I see. Qin Feiyang and the other 2 were enlightened. To be able to calculate the time and wait here, it seemed that Mo Dong and Mo Wushin's relationship was not ordinary. Fatso asked through telepathy, "Boss, what do you think?" Qin Feiyang said, "It's impossible to hide it because Wan Qiao and the others will say it sooner or later." Fatso said, "Then let's just say it." Lu Xingchen said, "Don't. We just came here. There are many things we don't know. It's not good to be hostile." Qin Feiyang thought for a while and said, "That's right. Let's let him slowly find out. It'll give us some time to prepare." "Understood," Fatso replied. He looked at Mo Dong and said, "Mo Wushin did participate in the 9 prefectures tournament, but he was unlucky and died." "What?" Mo Dong's expression froze. He said, "How did he die?" Fatso shook his head and said, "I don't know about that." Sigh. Mo Dong sighed deeply and said, "The 9 Nether Yellow Springs is full of danger. Death and injury are inevitable. But if I find out who killed him, I won't forgive him." The 3 of them were shocked. It seemed that they had to get rid of this person sooner or later. Mo Dong smiled and said, "Let's go. I'll bring you in and introduce the layout of the pill hall to you." "Thank you." Fatso thanked him. After that, the 3 of them followed behind Mo Dong as they walked along a corridor. According to Mo Dong's introduction, the pill hall had a total of 100 floors. Each floor had 1,000 alchemy rooms. In other words, the pill hall had 100,000 alchemy rooms. Moreover, each floor of the pill hall had its own independent alchemy fire. These alchemy fires were all of the 5th grade. Fatso was stunned. He said, "Doesn't that mean that there are 100 5th grade alchemy fires here?" "You must be shocked. When I first heard about it, I felt the same as you. I felt like a country bumpkin who had never seen the world." Mo Dong smiled bitterly. Fatso looked at Qin Feiyang and said, "Boss, now we don't have to worry about the Nether Devil Flame's advancement anymore." Qin Feiyang said to himself, "Indeed, we don't have to worry about it, but we can't have any ideas about these alchemy fires." "Understood." Fatso smiled and turned to look at Mo Dong. He said, "Senior Mo, I heard that the Divine Palace has some Dan-God list. Are the people on this list in the pill hall?" "Yes, they are on the top floor. However, I have never seen them before. Not only me, most of the people have never seen them before." Mo Dong said, "So mysterious?" Fatso was surprised. "Not only mysterious, but also monstrous, and very powerful. I heard that they are all existences who are about to step into the Battle Saint realm. We can only look up to these kinds of people." Mo Dong shook his head and sighed. "Look up to?" Qin Feiyang sneered. "So what if they are powerful? So what if they are talented?" Chapter 685. Mo Dong was walking in front, so he didn't notice Qin Feiyang's expression. He said, "Now you can only choose an alchemy room on the 1st floor." "Why?" Fatso frowned. "Because the alchemy rooms on the 99 floors are all occupied. However, this place is the same as the Sacred Hall. If you want an alchemy room, you can challenge the owner of that alchemy room. If you win, the alchemy room will belong to you." Mo Dong said. Fatso asked curiously, "Which floor are you on now?" Mo Dong said, "I'm on the 2nd floor." Fatso's face twitched. He had been in the Sacred Hall for 10 years, but he had only reached the 2nd floor. Wasn't he too useless? Mo Dong turned and looked at Fatso. He smiled and asked, "Are you thinking that I'm useless?" "Am I?" "Nope." Fatso laughed dryly. Mo Dong shook his head and continued to lead the way. He sighed and said, "The Sacred Hall isn't as simple as you think. Although on the surface the Sacred Hall is a single entity, but in fact the disciples are secretly forming factions. So here, even if you have outstanding abilities, you won't be able to reach a higher place if you don't have a backer." "Do you know who has the strongest backer here?" Mo Dong asked. Who? Fatso frowned. The disciples of the various feudal lords. In their eyes, people like us who have no power or influence are just playthings to pass the time. Mo Dong mocked himself. Fatso asked, "So, you also joined someone else's faction?" "If you want to survive, you have to rely on them. I joined the faction of a marquis's son. If you're willing to join, I can introduce you." Mo Dong smiled and said. Qin Feiyang smiled and said, "Forget it. We just want to cultivate quietly. Moreover, every floor of the pill hall has its own independent alchemy fire. It doesn't matter which floor we stay on. Although that's the case, there's a good saying. Man walks to the top while water flows to the bottom. No matter if it's the pill hall's disciple or the martial arts hall's disciple, all of them are trying their best to climb up. Because the higher you stand, the higher your status will be, and the more people will respect you." Mo Dong said. Qin Feiyang said, "There's another saying that's also very good. The higher you stand, the more painful it is to fall." Ugh! Mo Dong was stunned. He turned to look at Qin Feiyang, shook his head and said with a smile, "You're quite an interesting person. But I'll tell you the truth. The 100 alchemy rooms in front of each floor are all controlled by various forces. I believe all of you know that the higher the alchemy room is, the better the quality of the alchemy fire. So if you don't rely on them, even if these alchemy rooms are empty, they won't let you in." Mo Dong said. Qin Feiyang said, "What if I insist on going in?" Mo Dong said, "Then you will face endless troubles. You won't even be able to live a peaceful day, let alone cultivate in peace." Fatso said, unhappily, "These people are really overbearing. It can't be helped. The divine palace is just that cruel." Mo Dong sighed. Qin Feiyang asked, "Then, who's the one controlling the first floor of the pill hall?" "The son of Qianwu Marquis, Feng Yin." "All right. I've said everything that needs to be said. You guys can take your time to choose. As long as the stone door is open, it's an empty alchemy room. When you're done choosing, drip a drop of blood on the stone door. At that time, you can open or close the stone door with just a thought. And there's another benefit. If you don't open the door, no one can force their way in." After Mo Dong finished speaking, he quickened his pace and left quickly. Fatso retracted his gaze and looked at Qin Feiyang suspiciously. "Boss, do you know this Qianwu Marquis? Also, why isn't his surname Qin?" "Not everyone in the imperial capital has the surname Qin. Only the people in the imperial palace have the surname Qin. And this Qianwu Marquis, I know him. According to the ancient records, when the first emperor established the Great Qin Empire, there were many experts under him. But in the end, not many of them survived. On the day the Great Qin Empire was established, the first emperor rewarded those who died in battle according to their contributions in order to repay them. Among them, 100 were conferred the title of Marshal Marquis." Qin Feiyang said. Fatso frowned. "They're already dead. What's the point of being conferred the title of Marquis?" "Of course it's meaningful, because they all have descendants. And these Marshal Marquis positions are all inherited by their descendants. And it's passed down from generation to generation. Furthermore, before the emperor left, he left behind an edict that as long as the Great Qin Empire still exists, these 100 Marquis positions cannot be taken away, nor can they be removed. Marquis Qianwu is one of them." Qin Feiyang said. Fatso frowned. "In that case, wouldn't these Marquis have a gold medal to avoid death?" "That's right. In the past, no matter how big of a mistake they made, the emperors of the past would only scold them. At most, they would kill the person who made the mistake. They had never said that they would remove their Marquis positions. And in the past 10,000 years, none of these Marquis positions have disappeared, but no new Marquis has appeared in the imperial capital. This is also the reason why the descendants of the Marquis dare to act like a tyrant in the divine palace. As long as they don't do anything outrageous, the law-enforcing elders of the divine palace will turn a blind eye. Qin Feiyong said. Fatso mocked. This is really like the old saying, the people of the past plant the trees, and the people of the future enjoy the shade. If you ask me, this kind of hereditary system shouldn't have appeared. This is the edict of the first emperor, who dares to change it. Even the current emperor doesn't dare. Of course. The first emperor also did it out of good intentions, because there are too many people who kill donkeys after they've outlived their usefulness. What if the future emperor, in order to consolidate the country, kills all these meritorious officials? That's why the first emperor left behind this edict before he left. But now, these marquis are using his good intentions as capital to flaunt their power. I'm afraid this is something the first emperor didn't expect at the time. Lu Xingqian sighed. Yes, some people just don't know how to be content. Also, if I'm not wrong, the masters behind the various forces are not the descendants of the marquis, but the claws and teeth of the villain. Then who is it? Fatso asked. You can't even think of this? Lu Xingqian rolled his eyes and said, Of course it's the princes of the great Qin Empire. That's right. Although the first prince has been named the crown prince, as long as he hasn't ascended the throne, the other princes still have a chance. And winning over the hearts of the people and eliminating dissidents is the most important thing at the moment. Qin Feiyong sneered. Why does it sound like the divine palace is a battlefield for the princes to fight for the throne? Fatso said with a frown. This place has always been an invisible battlefield of smoke and gunpowder, because the divine palace contains all the geniuses of the great Qin Empire. It's also the cradle of the great Qin Empire's experts. Let's put it this way. Everyone here has the potential to become the future pillar of the great Qin Empire. So, they naturally scramble to come here to win over talents. Even if they can't become the emperor in the end, they still have a force in their hands. Qin Feiyong said. Lu Xingqian asked, What about you? Me. There's no need for that. Fatso and Wolf King are enough. Qin Feiyong smiled confidently. Hee. Fatso and Wolf King immediately looked at Lu Xingqian proudly. You guys keep showing off. Lu Xingqian rolled his eyes at them. Of course, he didn't deny it, because the people around Qin Feiyong had all opened the door of potential. The growth of these people far surpassed the geniuses of the divine palace. It wouldn't be long before their names appeared on the so-called alchemy god list and martial god list. In the end, just these few people would be able to shake the foundation of the great Qin Empire. Huff! Qin Feiyong took a deep breath and said with a faint smile, Let's not talk about it. Let's find the alchemy room. Fatso said domineeringly, Is there a need to find it? Let's go straight to the top floor. You'd better get rid of this idea as soon as possible. Now is different from before. In the past, I didn't have any worries and could do whatever I wanted. But now, we should keep a low profile as much as possible. I don't want to attract attention too early. Qin Feiyong said in a deep voice. Yes, the most important thing now is to improve our strength. Lu Xingqian nodded. Fatso said, All right, let's hide our strength and bide our time. When there's a chance in the future, we'll amaze the world. Lu Xingqian pointed to the left and said with a smile, There are a few alchemy rooms with open doors. The three of them walked over. There were a total of 5 alchemy rooms with open stone doors, and on the stone doors there was a number, 701 to 705. Qin Feiyong pointed to the alchemy room number 701 and said with a smile, I'll take this one. As he said that, he cut his finger and a drop of blood flowed out. In the blink of an eye, the drop of blood fell on the stone door. Buzz! At that moment, a faint layer of blood light appeared on the stone door, but very quickly, the blood light dissipated. At the same time, Qin Feiyong felt that the stone door seemed to have merged with him. Fatso, once you're settled, come find me immediately. There's one more thing I have to tell you. Then, after saying something to Fatso, Qin Feiyong walked into the alchemy room. With a thought, the stone door closed. The alchemy room Fatso chose was next to Qin Feiyong's, number 702. Lu Xingqian entered the alchemy room, number 703. The 3 alchemy rooms were the same size, 3 meters wide and very narrow. But fortunately, they were long enough, about 7 or 8 meters in length. The alchemy stone platform was designed in the innermost part, next to the wall. There was nothing else in other places. If one person lived in it, it was still quite spacious. Qin Feiyong looked around for a while, then walked to the stone platform and pressed a black button next to the stone platform. Buzz! An arm-thick alchemy fire suddenly rushed out from the center of the stone platform. The temperature of the alchemy room immediately soared. After watching for a while, Qin Feiyong turned off the alchemy fire. The nether devil flame was now a 5th-grade alchemy fire, so he didn't need the alchemy fire here at all. And this alchemy room, for him, was purely a place to hide his identity. Chapter 686. Dong. After a while, there was a knock on the door. Qin Feiyong moved his mind slightly, and the stone door quickly opened. Fatso trotted in and asked, "Boss, what else do you want to tell me?" "Sweep the medicinal herbs, especially the 9-turn dragon blood pill, small creation pill, spirit sea pill, and essence soul pill." Qin Feiyong said, "You don't have to tell me that. Fat Lord knows. But Fat Lord is thinking that the treasure pavilion in the imperial capital must have a lot of stock. If I want to sweep them all, I may not have enough gold coins on me." Fatso frowned. "Doesn't Lu Hong have more? This time, take all the savings we have over the years with you. If it's still not enough, send me a message." Qin Feiyong said. Wolf King said at this time, "Little Qin Zi, those potential pills are useless now. Can we sell them to the treasure pavilion in the imperial capital?" Fatso's eyes also lit up. Over the years, they had accumulated a lot of potential pills. If they sold them, it would not be a problem to buy half of the imperial capital, let alone sweep the medicinal herbs. Qin Feiyong pondered for a moment and shook his head. "These 2 pills are too powerful. I don't want to sell them unless it's a last resort. Once the potential pills appeared in the imperial capital, they would definitely be snatched by the princes in the end. Because in terms of wealth and power, no one in the imperial capital could compare to the princes. In other words, selling these 2 pills was tantamount to cultivating future enemies. He would not do such a ridiculous thing." Fatso nodded and frowned again. "Although your concerns are not wrong, have you forgotten about Wan Qiu and the others?" "Of course not. But they only know that we opened the gate of potential, but they don't know how we opened it." Qin Feiyong said, "No, you've neglected one person, the prefecture lord of Cloud State. Do you still remember what the old witch said to us when we first made a mess in the Cloud State?" Fatso reminded him. His words woke her up from her dream. Qin Feiyong's face immediately darkened. Back then, the Yunzhou prefecture master went to the spiritual state to get even with him, but before he went to see the old master, he secretly inquired about him in the city. At that time, the news that he had the potential pill had already spread to every city in the spiritual state. Therefore, it was very likely that the manor master of the Cloud State already knew about this back then. If it were someone else, he wouldn't be worried. After all, there was no deep hatred between them. But this old witch wanted nothing more than to tear him into pieces. She might really tell Wan Qiu and the others about this. Alas! Suddenly, Qin Feiyong heaved a long sigh. "Why are you sighing?" Fatso and Wolf King looked at him in confusion. "I wanted to keep a low profile, but now it seems that I can't keep a low profile for long. While there's still time, hurry up and do what I asked you to do." Qin Feiyong said. Fatso nodded. Then, Qin Feiyong entered the castle and brought out Lu Hong, the pangolin and the black dragon snake. He glanced at Wolf King and said, "You guys go and help. I'll give you the coordinates of the treasure pavilion." The coordinates of the treasure pavilion? The 2 men and 3 beasts were stunned. Qin Feiyong smiled and said, "I've lived here for 10 years after all. I know the coordinates of the treasure pavilion." They smiled. With the coordinates, it would be easier to do things. "But I also know the coordinates of the first district. You guys have to inquire about the treasure pavilions of the other 9 districts." After Qin Feiyong finished speaking, he told Fatso the coordinates. After Fatso memorized the coordinates, he asked suspiciously, "How many districts are there in the capital?" 12. From the inside to the outside, they are the Imperial Palace, the inner city, the 1st district to the 10th district. You don't need me to tell you about the Imperial Palace. And the inner city is where we are now. Other than the shrine, the 100 martial marquis also live in the inner city. As for the 1st district and the 10th district, there are also different levels. The people in the 1st district are either powerful and influential or extremely wealthy. For example, the Treasure Pavilion and the Fragrant Moon House are both located in the 1st district. And the 1st district is also the place where the royal family and the various martial marquis disciples go to the most. Qin Feiyong said. So many? The few of them were dumbstruck. Is there a lot? Just get used to it. You guys can go out and ask around for the details. Qin Feiyong laughed. All right, let's get busy. Fatso waved his hand and opened a teleportation door. Then he brought Lu Hong, Wolf King, and the 3 beasts and quickly walked in. When the teleportation door disappeared, Qin Feiyong also retracted his gaze and lowered his head to ponder. At the same time, the 1st floor of the martial arts hall. In a cultivation room, Wan Qiu sat cross-legged on an old praying mat. He lowered his head and looked at the pitch-black floor. His eyes flickered. Suddenly, he stood up and his eyes flashed with a shocking cold light. Qin Feiyong, just you wait. I won't let you have an easy time. Next, he walked out of the cultivation room and walked along a corridor, heading deeper into the palace. Although the martial arts hall was bigger than the pill hall, the internal structure was similar to the pill hall. There were a total of 100 floors. Each floor had 10,000 cultivation rooms. The total number was 1,000,000. Similarly, each floor was controlled by a martial marquis disciple. A moment later, Wan Qiu came to the 1st cultivation room on the 1st floor. He stood in front of the door and pondered for a moment. Then he reached out and knocked on the stone door. Rumble. Soon, the stone door opened. A young man in black entered Wan Qiu's line of sight. The young man's figure was tall and straight. He sat cross-legged on the praying mat. His face was filled with an insufferably arrogant aura. His cultivation was not bad. 3-star battle ancestor. Wan Qiu stood at the door and bowed. Greetings, Senior Marshal Brother Gao. The young man sized up Wan Qiu and frowned. You are. Wan Qiu said respectfully, I am a new disciple. My name is Wan Qiu. New. The young man was stunned. A trace of disdain crept into his eyes. He said indifferently, Do you need something from me? Wan Qiu said, I want to meet Senior Marshal Brother Lin Dian. I hope Senior Marshal Brother Gao can introduce me. The young man frowned and asked, You want to join our camp? Yes. Wan Qiu nodded. The young man said, If it's just this, you don't have to ask Senior Marshal Brother Lin Dian. I can make the decision directly. This, Wan Qiu frowned. What is this? Senior Marshal Brother Lin Dian is the son of a marquis. Is he someone you can meet just because you want to? Get lost. Don't disturb my cultivation. The young man waved his hand, his face full of disdain. A trace of hostility crept into Wan Qiu's brows. Wasn't he just a 3-star battle ancestor? What was he being arrogant for? However, he hid it very well. The young man did not notice. Wan Qiu suppressed his anger and cupped his hands. Senior Marshal Brother Gao, I'm looking for Senior Marshal Brother Lin Dian for something else. The young man said impatiently, If you have something to say, just say it. I'll pass it on for you. Wan Qiu's hands, which were hidden in his sleeves, could not help but clench. In Yu Zhou, who dared to speak to him like this, not to mention telling him to get lost. Unfortunately, this was not Yu Zhou. This was the divine temple. Even though he had a stomach full of anger, he could only hold it in. Tell me. Seeing that Wan Qiu did not say anything, the young man yelled. Wan Qiu quickly smiled and asked, I wonder if Senior Marshal Brother Gao has heard of the Door of Potential? The young man said angrily, Nonsense. Who doesn't know about the Door of Potential? Get to the point. Wan Qiu glanced at the corridor on both sides. Seeing that there was no one around, he whispered, I won't hide it from Senior Marshal Brother. I have a way to open the Door of Potential. What? The young man suddenly stood up and looked at Wan Qiu in disbelief. Wan Qiu said, I'm telling the truth. Good. I'll bring you to see Senior Marshal Brother Lin Dian immediately. Follow me. The young man's eyes trembled. He hurriedly walked out of the cultivation room and led Wan Qiu to the top floor of the martial arts hall. At the same time, in one of the cultivation rooms on the top floor of the martial arts hall, a black-clothed young man was half lying on a chair. He seemed to be recuperating with his eyes closed, and in front of this person, there was a person standing respectfully. It was Xing Wanli. The black-clothed young man said lazily, If you have something to say, say it quickly. Xing Wanli smiled and said, Senior Marshal Brother Caillou, on my way back to the martial arts hall, I met two good girls. Caillou said, How good are they? Xing Wanli moved closer to the black-clothed young man and whispered, They are both supreme grade. Caillou's spirit was lifted. He finally opened his eyes and said, What are their names? Xing Wanli said, One is called Xinmei, and the other is called Ren Wushuang. Why haven't I heard of them before? Caillou thought for a moment and frowned. They are both new disciples from the 9 prefectures. Senior Marshal Brother can make a move on them without any hesitation. Xing Wanli laughed mischievously. Caillou was stunned and said disdainfully, How good can women from the 9 prefectures be? Senior Marshal Brother, I'm not talking nonsense this time. If you don't believe me, you can take a look. After Xing Wanli finished speaking, he waved his hand. Battle aura surged, and 2 beautiful figures quickly condensed. They were Ren Wushuang and Shenmei. Looking at the 2 figures, Caillou instantly stood up. His breathing became hurried, and his eyes were filled with possessiveness. Xing Wanli smiled and said, Senior Marshal Brother Caillou, how is it? They are indeed rare, supreme-grade girls. Caillou licked his lips and turned to look at Xing Wanli. He said, Immediately think of a way. As long as you can help me get them, I will definitely reward you. Is there a need to think? Senior Marshal Brother, I'm not exaggerating. With your identity and status, as long as you give them some benefits, they will definitely obey you. Xing Wanli said disdainfully, That's true. How can those lowly people from the 9 prefectures see the world? Caillou nodded. Senior Marshal Brother, if you want to make a move, do it early, because they are now in the cultivation room on the 1st floor. If Lin Dian sees them, I'm afraid you won't have a share. Xing Wanli instigated. He is a piece of trash. What right does he have to snatch my women? Caillou snorted coldly and said, Go down immediately and tell them that as long as they agree to be my women and serve me well, I will guarantee them endless glory and wealth in the imperial capital. Understood. Chapter 687. What is he doing up here? Xing Wanli looked at Wan Qiu suspiciously before looking at the young man. He smiled and said, "Yo, isn't this the first floor's little tyrant Gao Ming? Why, are you here to lick your master's boots again?" Gao Ming raised his eyebrows and sneered. "You have the nerve to talk about me. Aren't you here to lick your master's boots too?" Xing Wanli said, "Although I'm following senior brother Caillou, I'm not like some people who act like a tyrant on the first floor." Gao Ming said disdainfully, "That's because I'm capable. So what? What can I do? You can continue to lick my master's boots. You don't know what shame is anyway." Xing Wanli smiled disdainfully and walked past Gao Ming and Wan Qiu. "You're just someone's dog. What's there to be proud of?" Wan Qiu sneered in his heart. He looked at Gao Ming and asked, "Senior brother Gao, who's his master?" Gao Ming looked at Xing Wanli's back coldly and pointed to the stone door at the side. He whispered, "It's the owner of this cultivation room. His name is Caillou, the son of Anwu Marquis. He's an old rival of our senior brother Lin Dian." "I see," Wan Qiu muttered and asked carefully, "Who's stronger between senior brother Lin Dian and Caillou?" "Nonsense. Of course it's our senior brother Lin Dian." "Why, you're asking me this now. Are you trying to lick Caillou's boots again?" Gao Ming looked at him unkindly. Wan Qiu's pupils shrank. He quickly waved his hand and said, No, I'm just asking out of curiosity. It better not be. I don't mind telling you the truth. Those who used to be two-timing didn't have a good ending. So in this divine hall, it's best not to play tricks." Gao Ming sneered and turned to walk forward. "Continue to be arrogant. I'll trample you under my feet sooner or later." Wan Qiu's eyes flashed coldly and quickly followed. Martial Arts Hall, first floor. Inside the 805 cultivation room, Rin Wushuang and Shen Mei were talking about something. Dong! Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. Shen Mei was slightly taken aback and asked suspiciously, "Who would come looking for us at this time?" "It could be Ling Yu and the others." Ran Wushuang smiled. With a thought, the stone door slowly opened. However, the person who entered their line of sight was not Ling Yu and the others, but Xing Wanli. Xing Wanli entered uninvited and smiled. "Are the two of you used to this place?" "It's all right." Ren Wushuang nodded with a smile and asked, "Senior brother Xing, are you looking for us for something?" "There's one thing. Furthermore, this matter is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for you all." Xing Wanli smiled. Ren Wushuang said, "Please speak, Senior Martial Brother Xing. We are all ears." "To be honest, Senior Brother Caillou has taken a liking to the two of you, and Senior Brother Caillou is the son of the Anwu Marquis. As long as you agree to be his woman, you will immediately be able to fly to the top and become a phoenix. Don't you think this is a good thing?" Xing Wanli smiled. However, Ren Wushuang's and Shen Mei's faces were already covered in a layer of frost. Sure enough, as Qin Feiyan had expected, this person had ulterior motives. Shen Mei was about to fly into a rage. Ren Wushuang's eyes flashed and reached out to stop her. He looked at Xing Wanli and smiled faintly. "Senior Martial Brother Xing, do you have any sisters?" "Yes." Xing Wanli nodded and looked suspiciously at Ren Wushuang. He did not know why she asked this. "Since there is, why not introduce them to Senior Brother Caillou? In this way, you and the Anwu Marquis will be in-laws. At that time, there will be many benefits, right?" Ren Wushuang laughed. Shen Mei also burst out laughing on the spot. She nodded and said, "That's right. Keep the goodies within the family. Your relationship with Senior Brother Caillou is so good. If you can become even closer, won't you be able to do whatever you want in the temple in the future?" Hearing these words, Xing Wanli's face suddenly became gloomy. "Don't be shameless." "Sorry, your disgusting face. Leave it for others to see. You are not welcome here, scram." Ren Wushuang said expressionlessly, Don't fail to appreciate kindness. Let me tell you, if you don't obey today, in the future, you won't have a good life. A cold light surged in Xing Wanli's eyes. Shinmei sneered. Then let's see who won't have a good life. All right, just you wait. Xing Wanli snorted and turned to leave angrily. Shinmei immediately went forward and closed the stone door tightly. She said in disgust, "This person is really disgusting. There are all kinds of birds in the forest. However, if this Caillou really makes a move on us, the consequences will be unimaginable. We have to think of a way as soon as possible." Ran Wushuang said, his brows filled with worry. "We are unfamiliar with this place, and the other party is the son of a marquis. What can we do?" Hearing Ran Wushuang's words, Shen Mei's heart also became heavy. After pondering for a while, Ran Wushuang sighed, "We can only send a message to Feiyang and see if he has any ideas." Because, after thinking about it, she thought of Qin Feiyang. After they took out the image crystal and told Qin Feiyang everything that had happened, Qin Feiyang's heart burned with anger. He actually dared to have ideas about Ran Wushuang. He was simply courting death. After comforting the two women, Qin Feiyang was silent for a moment, then walked out of the alchemy room to find Lu Xingchen. Lu Xingchen opened the stone door and looked at Qin Feiyang with a gloomy face. He asked suspiciously, "What's wrong?" Qin Feiyang said in a deep voice, "Trouble is coming. Come in and talk." Lu Xingchen frowned and retreated to the side. After Qin Feiyang went in, Lu Xingchen looked at the corridor on both sides, then closed the stone door and turned to look at Qin Feiyang, asking, "What trouble?" Qin Feiyang said, "Originally, I didn't want to disturb you, but after thinking about it, I still need to tell you." "What is it?" Lu Xingchen frowned. Qin Feiyang said in a deep voice, "Someone is having ideas about Shinmei and Ren Wushuang, and just a while ago they were blatantly threatening them." "What?" Lu Xingchen's brows suddenly crept up with a trace of hostility, saying, "Who?" Qin Feiyang's eyes flashed slightly. Hearing that Shinmei was in trouble, Lu Xingchen had such a big reaction. It seemed that he really cared about Shinmei. Xing Wanli, but not himself. It's the person behind him, the son of Marquis Anwu, Caillou. I know this person. He's more than 20 years older than me. When I was a child in the imperial capital, I saw him a few times, but I didn't have a good impression of him." Qin Feiyang said. "What do you mean?" Lu Xingchen was suspicious. "He's lascivious by nature, wanting to possess a slightly beautiful woman and throwing her away when he's tired of her. He's a typical dandy scum. But back then, he hadn't entered the divine hall yet. After so many years, he should have changed, but I didn't expect him to still be like this." Qin Feiyang sneered. "The son of Marquis Anwu?" Lu Xingchen raised his eyebrows. If it was just an ordinary disciple, he wouldn't care. But the other party was the son of Marquis Anwu, with a high position and great influence, so he had to act carefully. Lu Xingchen asked, "What did you say to Shinmei and the others?" Qin Feiyang said, "I told them not to worry. I'll think of a way to deal with it." "You have a way?" Lu Xingchen's eyes lit up. Qin Feiyang was speechless. "I was just comforting them. If I really had a way, I wouldn't have come to you." Lu Xingchen's eyes turned cold, saying, "If he really dares to make a move on Shinmei, I guarantee that he'll die without an intact corpse, even if he's the son of Marquis Anwu." Ah, Qin Feiyang was stunned and asked curiously, "Can you tell me, what's your relationship with Shinmei now?" Lu Xingchen was silent for a while and sighed. "It's not a secret, so there's no harm in telling you. In fact, I really like her now, but because of what happened in the past, she can't accept me." "Really?" Qin Feiyang looked at him doubtfully. "Of course. Ever since I came back from the dead, I've never knelt to anyone. She's the first. But she just won't forgive me. I really have a headache now. I don't know what to do to move her again." Lu Xingchen's heart was bitter. Qin Feiyang said indifferently, "This is the result of your own actions. Who's to blame?" Yes. Who can I blame? I can only blame myself. I was stupid back then. I didn't know how to cherish such a good woman. Lu Xingqian sighed deeply, his face full of regret. Qin Feiyang scanned Lu Xingqian's face and couldn't find any traces of deception. It seemed that Lu Xingqian wasn't lying. He patted Lu Xingqian's shoulder and said with a smile, "As long as you're sincere, I'll support you. But if you play any tricks, don't blame me for falling out with you. Don't worry, I've already missed it once. I won't miss it a second time." Lu Xingqian forced a smile. Qin Feiyang said, "Now, let's discuss how to resolve this matter." Lu Xingqian nodded, then suddenly said, "Wait, since you know about my relationship with Shen Mei, shouldn't you also tell me about your relationship with Ren Wushuang?" Qin Feiyang said with a smile, "She and I are purely siblings." Siblings? Lu Xingqian was stunned and asked, "When did this happen?" "Very long ago. At that time, I hadn't gone to the capital yet." Qin Feiyang said. Lu Xingqian said in realization, "No wonder you take care of her so much. So this is the relationship. She also took care of me when I was weak. You can say that she treats me like a younger brother. So, I will never allow anyone to hurt her." Qin Feiyang's eyes flashed with a cold light. Lu Xingqian said, "So that's why you always targeted me back then?" Qin Feiyang glanced at him and said indifferently, "That's what you deserve." "Well, it's all my fault." Lu Xingqian smiled bitterly. At this moment, there was no hostility between the two. They were like old friends who had been together for many years. Then, the two of them began to discuss in low voices. In the blink of an eye, half an hour passed. Dong! All of a sudden, there was a deafening knock on the door outside. The two of them looked up at the stone door at the same time. Lu Xingqian frowned and said, "It seems to be the stone door on your side. Who would be looking for you with such a big commotion?" Usually, the knocking on the door wouldn't be so loud unless the other party had ill intentions. "I don't know." Chapter 688. Outside his alchemy room. Two young men stood side by side. It was Wan Qiu and Gao Ming. Lu Xingqian walked out. When he saw Wan Qiu, he couldn't help but frown and send a sound transmission. What is he doing here? It's definitely nothing good. Qin Feiyang secretly sneered. At the same time, Wan Qiu also pointed at Qin Feiyang and said in a low voice, "Senior brother Gao, he is Qin Feiyang." Gao Ming glanced at Qin Feiyang indifferently, then looked at Lu Xingqian and shouted, "This has nothing to do with you. Go back to your alchemy room." So arrogant? Lu Xingqian raised his eyebrows. This person's cultivation was only a 3-Star Wars sect. A mere 3-Star Wars sect was already so arrogant. What was he relying on? Thinking of this, Lu Xingqian's heart skipped a beat, and he asked, "Brother Qin, could he be Kai Yu?" "No," Qin Feiyang replied. "Then who is he? Kai Yu's lackey?" Lu Xingqian frowned. "It should be," Qin Feiyang muttered, his gaze falling on Wan Qiu, and said, "Not bad. You've just arrived at the temple, and you've already found a backer." Wan Qiu did not answer, his face rather gloomy, because Qin Feiyang's words were obviously mocking him for currying favor. Qin Feiyang sneered and looked at Gao Ming. "If you have something to say, say it." Gao Ming teased, "Are you sure you want to say it here?" Qin Feiyang raised his eyebrows, and an uneasy premonition arose in his heart. Gao Ming's words also had a hidden meaning. Lu Xingqian retreated to the side and said with a faint smile, "Since it's hard to say, then let's talk in my alchemy room." "All right." Gao Ming nodded and swaggered into Lu Xingqian's alchemy room with Wan Qiu. Looking at Wan Qiu, who was flaunting his prowess and relying on his master's power, Qin Feiyang's brows tightly knitted together as he said to himself, "Why did you save such a trash in the first place?" How would I know that he's so spineless? Lu Xingqian was also very angry. Qin Feiyang glanced at him, then turned around and entered the alchemy room. Wan Qiu, wake up. If this continues, I will kill you with my own hands. Lu Xingqian muttered to himself and walked into the alchemy room. With a thought, the stone door quickly closed. Qin Feiyang looked at Gao Ming and said, "Speak." Gao Ming said, "Let me introduce myself first. I am Gao Ming, the chief of the first floor of the martial arts hall." "Overlord?" Qin Feiyang's face twitched. A small, 3-star combat grandmaster actually called himself the chief of the first floor of the martial arts hall. Wasn't his skin too thick? Why didn't he blush when he said such big words? Qin Feiyang didn't understand and said, "Senior Brother Gao, I want to ask who gave you the courage to call yourself the chief of the martial arts hall?" Before Gao Ming could speak, Wan Qiu said first, "I'm afraid that I will scare you if I tell you." "So scary?" Qin Feiyang was stunned and said jokingly, "I really want to know." "Hurry up and say it to scare me." Gao Ming frowned and laughed. "Kid, you're very arrogant." Qin Feiyang quickly waved his hand and said, No. Compared to arrogance, I'm not even 1/10,000th of you, Senior Brother Gao. You don't know what's good for you." Gao Ming's eyes darkened and said word by word, "Listen carefully. The person behind me is Senior Brother Lin Dian." "Lin Dian?" Qin Feiyang was stunned and thought carefully. Soon he remembered that this was another martial marquis disciple. Seeing this, Wan Qiu thought that Qin Feiyang was really scared and said sarcastically, "You can continue to be arrogant." Lu Xingqian said angrily, "You're licking your face and running to be someone else's dog. Do you still think it's honorable?" Wan Qiu was embarrassed and angry. He gritted his teeth and said, "What did you say? Say it again if you dare." Of course, this was not honorable. To him, it was a stain that could not be erased in his life. But did he have a choice? No. In order to survive, in order to take revenge on Qin Feiyang, he could only put down his pride and curry favor with others. Lu Xingqian looked at Wan Qiu indifferently and said, "I only want to tell you one thing. A person must have a backbone. If you don't even have a backbone, what's the difference between you and a beast?" "Shut up!" But before he finished speaking, Gao Ming shouted coldly. He glanced at Lu Xingqian gloomily and said with a sinister smile, "You have a backbone, don't you?" Lu Xingqian scolded Wan Qiu, which was equivalent to scolding him, because he also put down his pride and worked like a horse for Lin Dian. So, hearing Lu Xingqian's words, he felt as if someone had stepped on his tail, and he was extremely angry. But facing Gao Ming's cold eyes, Lu Xingqian was unmoved and said indifferently, "Did I scold you? I don't think so. Then why are you talking so much?" Crack! Gao Ming clenched his fists and stared at Lu Xingqian. His joints made ear-piercing sounds. "What's the situation now? Are you going to kill me?" Lu Xingqian looked at Gao Ming playfully. The temple had rules that forbade private fights. Although the disciples of the various martial marquises had formed their own cliques here, they absolutely did not dare to break this rule. Not to mention this Gao Ming. Moreover, if they really fought, Lu Xingqian had full confidence that he could crush this person. Wan Qiu stood at the side and looked at Gao Ming without the slightest intention of stopping him. Because, whether it was Qin Feiyang, Lu Xingqian, or Gao Ming, they were all people he wanted to get rid of. He couldn't wait for the three to fight and be killed by the people of the law enforcement hall. But in the end, he was disappointed. Gao Ming didn't make a move. What a joke! After all, he was an old disciple of the temple. How could he have no sense of propriety? Phew! Gao Ming took a deep breath and looked at Qin Feiyang. "Let's not talk nonsense. I came to find you to give you a chance to make a meteoric rise. You're so kind." Qin Feiyang was surprised. Gao Ming said, "Senior Brother Lin Dian said that as long as you hand over the potential pill formula, you'll be his brother in the future. Not to mention that you can do whatever you want in the temple. At least no one will dare to provoke you. Qin Feiyang's heart skipped a beat. The thing he was worried about had happened. He pretended to be confused and asked, "What potential pill? Why haven't I heard of it?" Wan Qiu sneered. "Stop pretending." "What do you mean?" Qin Feiyang frowned. "Before coming to the capital, the Yunzhou prefecture master came to me and told me personally that you can refine a pill that can open the door of potential. I was very surprised when I heard about it. So I asked the Yunzhou prefecture master for the coordinates and sneaked into the capital of your spiritual state. After I asked around carefully, there really is such a thing as the potential pill. Also, I heard that you can refine a pill that can allow a war emperor to break through several realms at once." Wan Qiu sneered. "Heard about it." Qin Feiyang's eyes suddenly flashed with a shocking cold light. Wan Qiu panicked and didn't dare to look directly at him. Gao Ming stood in front of Wan Qiu and looked at Qin Feiyang. "Are you still going to deny it?" Qin Feiyang glanced at Gao Ming and said indifferently, "Get out of the way." Qin Feiyang's tone was very calm, but in Gao Ming's ears it seemed to carry a great pressure that made Gao Ming panic. This situation was very difficult for Gao Ming to accept. The other party was just a lowly person from the spiritual state, and whether it was strength or status, he was far superior to the other party. What was he afraid of? Qin Feiyang's eyes surged with a cold light as he said word by word, "I told you to get out of the way. Didn't you hear me?" "What if I don't?" Gao Ming straightened his back and stared at Qin Feiyang arrogantly. But in fact, the fear in his heart was even stronger. He felt that the man in front of him was like a beast that was gradually awakening. Swoosh! Suddenly, Qin Feiyang took a step forward. Seeing this, the flustered Gao Ming's heart suddenly skipped a beat, and he instinctively retreated to the side. Seeing Gao Ming in such a state, Wan Qiu couldn't help but feel nervous. Because he knew Qin Feiyang too well, this was a lawless lord. Qin Feiyang looked at Wan Qiu again and said, "Who else knows about this?" This time the people who came to the capital, Ben knows. He couldn't even speak clearly. It was obvious how scared Wan Qiu was at this moment. Qin Feiyang said, "Did you hear it from the Yunzhou mansion master?" Wan Qiu nodded. Qin Feiyang clenched his hands, and his eyes flashed with murderous intent. This old witch really deserved to die. Lu Xingqian looked at Qin Feiyang and transmitted his voice, "Brother Qin, don't be rash." "Don't worry, I haven't lost my mind yet." Qin Feiyang responded and looked at Gao Ming indifferently. "Go back and tell Lin Dian that I have the recipe for the potential pill. But if he wants me to hand it over, let's see if he has the ability." Gao Ming was immediately furious and shouted, "Don't refuse a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. Get lost." Qin Feiyang roared. He definitely wouldn't be nice to such a person. "Okay, just you wait." Gao Ming left a harsh sentence and left angrily with Wan Qiu. Lu Xingqian sighed. "Brother Qin, it's all my fault. I shouldn't have pleaded for Wan Qiu. This matter is ultimately the fault of the Yunzhou mansion master. This damn old witch, I will never let her go." Qin Feiyang snorted coldly. Lu Xingqian sighed. "It won't be that easy to kill her now, but there will be a chance sooner or later. The most important thing now is to think about how to get through this difficult time." Qin Feiyang lowered his head and pondered. Lu Xingqian said, "Why don't we do it according to the plan we discussed earlier?" Qin Feiyang frowned and shook his head. "I have to think about it." "Okay, then, think about it. But let me tell you, this may be the only way. Of course, you can also hide in the alchemy room and not come out, but I believe that with your pride, you won't do that." Lu Xingqian smiled. "The situation has already developed to this point. What pride do you have left?" Qin Feiyang shook his head and returned to alchemy room 701. He closed the stone door and pondered alone. "I'm still not strong enough. If I had the strength of the current emperor, Why would I hide here? A moment later, Qin Feiyang raised his head and sighed. He entered the ancient castle, opened the 6-word divine formula, and continued to copy the first stroke of the kill word formula. The kill word formula had a total of 7 strokes. As long as he copied all of them, his cultivation could break through to the 8-star battle grandmaster, and he was only 2 steps away from the battle saint. At that time, with his trump card, although he couldn't compete with the experts of the Imperial Palace, he could be considered a hero among the disciples of the Divine Hall, Martial Arts Hall, in a cultivation room. You can't even do such a small thing. What's the use of you? A young man in black robes shouted angrily at Gao Ming and Wan Chou. This person was Lin Dian. Chapter 689. Gao Ming said, "Senior brother Lin Dian, you can't blame me and Wan Chou for this. It's Qin Feiyang who is too arrogant. He didn't even put us in his eyes. Yeah, not to mention us. Even you, senior brother Lin Dian, are beneath his notice." Wan Chou added fuel to the fire. Lin Dian frowned and said, "He dares to be so arrogant." "He's more than arrogant. He even said that even if you kneel in front of him and beg him, he wouldn't give you the pill formula." Wan Chou said, and Gao Ming turned and looked at Wan Chou suspiciously. Why didn't he hear Qin Feiyang say those words back then? However, when Wan Chou gave him a signal, he understood. At this moment, Lin Dian looked at Gao Ming and asked, "He really said that?" And he did. Gao Ming nodded without hesitation. Bastard. Lin Dian was furious. He stood up and said, "Lead the way. I want to meet him personally." Gao Ming and Wan Chou looked at each other. They quickly turned and ran out of the cultivation room. They sneered in their hearts. "Qin Feiyang, you're dead this time. Just you wait." As the son of a martial marquis, Lin Dian had a noble status. Hence, when he walked out of the cultivation room, he caused a commotion in the martial arts hall. Where is he going? His expression is a bit ugly. Which unlucky person offended him this time? Let's go and take a look. For a moment, everyone who met Lin Dian followed behind him curiously and rushed towards the pill hall. "Lin Dian, are you planning to cause trouble in my pill hall?" When Lin Dian arrived at the entrance of the pill hall, the white-haired old man sitting behind the transparent window immediately raised his head and looked at Lin Dian unkindly. Lin Dian was very honest in front of this old man. He cupped his hands and said, "Elder, you misunderstood. I'm only here to look for a friend. Elder, please make an exception." "Sure, but remember, don't break the rules of the Divine Hall." The white-haired old man said meaningfully, then lowered his head and continued with his work. With his eyesight, how could he not see that Lin Dian had come with ill intentions? But as long as no one died, he couldn't be bothered to care. "Thank you, Elder." Lin Dian cupped his hands in thanks, then led Gao Ming and Wan Chou inside. Those who wanted to join in the fun also wanted to go in, but at this moment, the white-haired old man shouted without raising his head, "Who gave you the right to enter? Scram!" Upon hearing this, the people who had come to join in the fun shrank their necks and turned to flee. However, they didn't leave. They stood at the plaza far away and looked at the pill hall curiously. Very soon, Lin Dian and the other 2 arrived outside pill refining room 701. However, no matter how the 3 of them knocked on the door, Qin Feiyang did not respond. This made Lin Dian very angry. One had to know. He was the son of a martial marquis. Usually, no matter how many people tried to curry favor with him, he was too lazy to even look at them. Now, he had personally paid a visit, but he had been turned away. This was simply a slap to his face. However, no matter how angry he was, he couldn't break into the pill refining room to settle the score with Qin Feiyang. Nor did he dare to make a big deal out of it. After saying a few harsh words, He brought Wan Qiu and Shen Huang back with disappointment. However, this grudge had been formed. Similarly, Xing Wanli, who was driven out by Ren Wushuang and Shen Huang, also added fuel to the fire in front of Kaiyu. Without a doubt, Kaiyu was also furious. He personally went to look for Ren Wushuang and Shen Mei, but the result was the same as Lin Dian. He was turned away. Actually, this was what Lu Xingqian told them to do. Since they couldn't afford to offend him, they could just hide. At most, they would just stay in the cultivation room and not go out. What could they do to them? Smash the cultivation room's stone door and force their way in? Do they dare? Time flew by. 3 days later, Fatso, Lu Hong, Wolf King, Black Dragon Snake, and Pangolin finally returned. Inside the castle, Qin Feiyong looked at them and smiled. How's the harvest? Full of rewards. Fatso smiled, took out a Qinquan bag and threw it to Qin Feiyong. Qin Feiyong caught it in his hand and sank his mind into it. He was really shocked. It was full of medicinal herbs. We didn't count how many there are. However, except for the general pavilion in the 1st district, the other 9 districts have been ransacked by us. Fatso said, Qin Feiyong was slightly stunned and asked suspiciously, the general pavilion has the most medicinal herbs. Why didn't you buy them? Lu Hong pouted and complained, it's all Fatso's fault. Fatso also laughed awkwardly. What's going on? Qin Feiyong looked at the two suspiciously. At first, when he heard that there was a big deal, the steward of the general pavilion was quite enthusiastic. But this damned Fatso directly waved his hand and said that he wanted to buy all the medicinal herbs in the treasure pavilion. As soon as he heard this, the steward of the general pavilion turned hostile on the spot and directly kicked us out. Lu Hong said. Qin Feiyong's face twitched, and he looked at Fatso helplessly. I told you to keep a low profile. Why didn't you listen? Fatso said aggrievedly. Fat Lord didn't say anything wrong. We were going to buy medicinal herbs. It's good to buy medicinal herbs, but with your tone, who can stand it? Besides, you are all unfamiliar faces and your cultivation is not very strong, and the total value of the medicinal herbs in the general pavilion is immeasurable. The steward will naturally think that you don't have the financial resources. After hearing your words, of course he will treat you like a lunatic and kick you out. Qin Feiyong rolled his eyes. Fatso still had the ability to do things, but he was too arrogant. But fortunately, the medicinal herbs of the other branches were all in hand, so it was not too much of a loss. Fatso also knew that he was in the wrong and did not continue to quibble. He smiled and said, I will pay attention next time. Okay, everyone, quickly organize the medicinal herbs. Qin Feiyong smiled. In fact, he did not mean to blame Fatso. He just wanted Fatso to pay attention in the future. Suddenly, he seemed to have thought of something and looked at Fatso and asked, How many gold coins do we have left? Fatso thought for a moment and said, There are still more than 5 billion. Fat Lord roughly calculated that we spent hundreds of billions just to buy medicinal herbs this time. Worth it. Qin Feiyong nodded without hesitation and said, Change your appearance and go to the general pavilion again. You must get the medicinal herbs of the 9-turn dragon blood pill. But Fatso frowned, wanting to say something. Qin Feiyong laughed. If you don't have enough gold coins, send me a message and I'll think of a way. All right. Fatso nodded, carefully looked at Qin Feiyong, and asked suspiciously, Boss, why is there a trace of worry on your face? Sigh. Originally, I wanted to keep a low profile, but before I could catch my breath, a lot of trouble came knocking on my door. How can I not be worried? Qin Feiyong sighed. What trouble? Everyone frowned. Qin Feiyong, briefly, told them about Kaiyu and Lin Dian. Damn it, they are courting death. Wolf King immediately said angrily. Fatso said, We should have killed that old witch in Yunzhou. Not that I want to pour cold water on you, but do you have the strength to do so? Lu Hong rolled her eyes and looked at Qin Feiyang. Then what's the plan you and Lu Xingqian discussed? Qin Feiyang said, He wants me to join the first prince. What? The 2 men and 3 beasts were dumbfounded. He knows your relationship with the first prince, and he still came up with such a bad idea. Isn't it obvious that he has bad intentions? Wolf King said angrily, It's not a bad idea. The first prince is now the crown prince, and he has more power than the other princes. If we really go and seek refuge with him, small fries like Lin Dian and Kai Yu wouldn't dare to provoke us in the future, even if they had the guts. Qin Feiyang smiled faintly. The fatty said, You're right, but isn't this a little too embarrassing? What's your plan? Qin Feiyang pondered for a moment and said, I'm going to do as Lu Xingqian said. What? Fatso and the others looked at each other. Who knew Qin Feiyang better than them? It was impossible for him to do such a spineless thing. There must be a reason. To be honest, I'm not very willing. But if I have a good relationship with the first prince, I can get a lot of information about the imperial palace from him. Most importantly, I miss my mother too much and want to go to the imperial palace to see her. And with my current status, it's impossible to sneak into the imperial palace, especially the harem where my mother is. Even the marquises are not qualified to enter. But the princes are different. Their mothers all live in the harem and can come and go freely. Qin Feiyang was melancholy. As a son, it was so difficult to see his biological mother. What a sad life, Fatso said. So you chose the first prince? Yes. Know yourself and know your enemy, and you will be victorious. The first prince is the biggest threat to me. So I have to get close to him and understand him. But I won't be like Wan Qiu, who licked his face and asked for protection. I want to wait for him to come to me and beg me to be his guest. The corners of Qin Feiyang's mouth lifted slightly, forming a cold and arrogant arc. Fatso thought for a while and said with a smile, If that's the case, Fat Lord won't object. All right, you do as you see fit. Fat Lord will go and get busy. Qin Feiyang nodded. Fatso opened a portal and quickly left. Qin Feiyang looked at Lu Hong and asked, How's the investigation of the matter I asked you to do? It's all clear. The first prince was appointed as the crown prince 5 years ago. He lives in the imperial palace all year round. But his cultivation is not very good. It's said that he's only a 5-star combat emperor. As for the rest, the imperial capital has been very peaceful for more than 10 years. Nothing major has happened. Lu Hong said, Very good. The first prince is only 8 or 9 years older than me. And at that time when I was expelled from the imperial capital, he was only a 5-star martial ancestor. To be able to break through to the 5-star combat emperor in these 10 years is already very heaven-defying. I'm afraid that the emperor spent a lot of effort to cultivate him. Qin Feiyang said with a faint smile, That's funny. A person who was personally cultivated by the emperor is only a 5-star combat emperor. And you, a person who relied on yourself all the way, have already broken through to the war master level. I wonder what expression the emperor will have when he knows about this. Lu Hong covered her mouth and laughed. Wolf King chuckled and added, And his cultivation was crippled, which delayed him for 5 years. In other words, little Qin Zi really started cultivating when he was 15. That's right. Lu Hong nodded and said with a smile, I believe that not only the emperor but also the princes and dukes will have very interesting expressions. Then let's wait and see. Chapter 690. Martial Arts Hall. Lin Dian sat on a chair, looked at Wan Qiu and Gao Ming in front of him and asked, How is it? In the past 3 days, Qin Feiyang hasn't walked out of the alchemy room. We can't find a chance at all. Gao Ming shook its head, feeling quite distressed. That damn bastard, I don't believe he'll hide in there for the rest of his life." Lin Dian was furious when he heard this. Wan Qiu said cautiously, "I'm guessing he'll really hide in the alchemy room and not come out." Lin Dian also had a headache and asked, "Then does he have any special friends?" "Yes, the people of the spiritual state have a good relationship with him, but the best is still Ren Wuxuang." Wan Qiu said, "Ren Wuxuang?" Lin Dian frowned and asked suspiciously, "Who is this person?" "This person is the granddaughter of the spiritual state mansion master. She's quite pretty, but she's too stubborn. I went to her yesterday and wanted to use her to threaten Qin Feiyang, but no matter what I said, she wouldn't open the door. I also heard that Kaiyu also has designs on this Ren Wuxuang, but he was also rejected in the end." Wan Qiu said, "Kaiyu?" Lin Dian lowered his head, pondered for a while, and sneered. "Kaiyu has seen countless women, and he doesn't like ordinary goods at all. This woman must be superb for him to take a fancy to. What does she look like? Let me see." Wan Qiu waved his hand, and a phantom quickly appeared. Lin Dian sized up Ren Wuxuang's phantom, licked his lips, and chuckled. "She's really a femme fatale." Gao Ming had an idea and said, "Senior brother, do you want me to bring her to you?" Lin Dian said disdainfully, "Even Kaiyu is rejected. Do you think you can get her to walk out of the cultivation room with your little ability?" Gao Ming smiled embarrassedly. Lin Dian said, "Although this woman is not bad-looking, the potential pill is more important. We cannot waste time on her." Wan Qiu added, "We still have to hurry, otherwise if the other Marshal Marquis disciples receive the news, they will definitely look for Qin Feiyang." "Yes," Lin Dian nodded. This was what he was most worried about. The potential pill was extremely tempting. Once it was exposed to the world, not just the Hall of Gods, but the entire capital would be in an uproar. Gao Ming asked, "Then, does Senior Apprentice Brother Lin Dian have any brilliant plans?" "You still have the nerve to ask me? Don't you usually boast that you're very smart? Why are you so useless at critical moments?" Lin Dian said furiously. Hearing this, Gao Ming's heart was filled with bitterness. The other party was hiding in the pill forging room, refusing to come out. He couldn't even meet him, so what could he do? Even if he had a way, he wouldn't be able to use it. Lin Dian glanced at Gao Ming coldly, then looked at Wan Qiu and said, "You know Qin Feiyang better than we do. Tell me, how should we deal with him?" Wan Qiu sighed. "To be honest, this person is unmoved by force or persuasion. It's not easy to deal with him." Lin Dian frowned. "He doesn't have a weakness." "Yes, his weakness is the people closest to him. This is also his only weakness. However, other than Ren Wuxuang, everyone else is hiding in his ancient castle. There's no chance at all." Wan Qiu said, "Ancient castle?" Lin Dian was stunned and asked, "What ancient castle?" Wan Qiu said, "It's a spatial treasure that can hide in. He dares to be so unscrupulous precisely because of this ancient castle." Spatial treasure. Lin Dian's gaze trembled. This lowly person from the spiritual state actually had such a treasure? Gao Ming's eyes were also filled with disbelief. "Senior Apprentice Brother Lin Dian, should we ask him to come out?" This, Lin Dian frowned. Wan Qiu glanced at the two suspiciously. "Who is this he?" Gao Ming continued, "If he comes out with his identity, I think Qin Feiyang would be eager to curry favor with him. How would he dare to act rashly? If he comes out, it'll be a piece of cake." But Lin Dian was hesitant. Gao Ming said, "I know that this will make us look incompetent, but there's no other way now." Wan Qiu asked telepathically, "Senior Apprentice Brother Gao, who are you talking about?" Gao Ming said to himself, "A terrifying person, the current 13th prince." What? Wan Qiu's body and mind trembled. "I'll tell you the truth. The masters behind the various forces are not senior apprentice brother Lin Dian and the others, but the princes of the imperial palace. We belong to the 13th prince's camp. Gao Ming replied telepathically. Hearing this, the shock in Wan Chao's heart could not be any greater. Princes, those are the high and mighty sons of the imperial emperor. Every single one of them is a dragon amongst men. Even the various martial marquises have to greet them respectfully. He never thought that the divine palace would be so complicated. All right, finally, Lin Dian finally made a decision and said, I'll immediately send a message to the 13th prince. You two continue to guard the Pill Palace. Once Qin Feiyang appears, inform me immediately. Yes. Wan Xiao and Gao Ming replied respectfully and quickly left the cultivation room. At the same time, outside the Pill Palace, a white-clothed woman descended on the plaza. She looked to be around 30 years old, but her figure was very good. She was still charming, and her aura was unfathomable. Greetings, Palace Master. As soon as she appeared, the disciples of the Pill Palace who were passing by immediately stopped and bowed to greet her. Moreover, the white-haired old man who was sitting behind the transparent window also hurriedly ran out. He stood in front of the white-clothed woman and bowed to her. The white-clothed woman asked, 3 days ago, did a little guy called Qin Feiyang come? Qin Feiyang. The white-haired old man thought for a while and nodded. There is indeed a person called Qin Feiyang. What's wrong? Did he do something wrong? The white-clothed woman said, Bring me to see him. The white-haired old man stuttered for a while and said with a bit of panic, Palace Master, I also don't know which alchemy room he is in. You don't know? The white-clothed woman frowned and said angrily, As the Pill Palace's managing elder, you don't even know which alchemy room the disciple is in. Tell me, what is he doing all day? The white-haired old man lowered his head. His old face was filled with panic. The white-clothed woman said, I'll give you 100 breaths to find out. If you can't find out, you can go to the law enforcement palace and stay there for a few days. As soon as he heard the law enforcement palace, the white-haired old man's eyes trembled. The panic on his face became even stronger. The white-clothed woman shouted, What are you waiting for? Yes. I'll go now. The white-haired old man quivered and quickly ran into the Pill Palace. Not even 100 breaths had passed. The white-haired old man hurriedly ran out again and said, Palace Master, Qin Feiyang is in alchemy, room number 701. I'll lead the way for you. No need. I can go by myself. The white-clothed woman said indifferently and walked into the Pill Palace. However, when she reached the door, she suddenly turned her head and looked at the white-haired old man. Restrain yourself. Yes. I'll definitely restrain myself. The white-haired old man nodded continuously. His forehead was already covered in cold sweat. When the white-clothed woman entered the Pill Palace and disappeared, he let out a sigh of relief. However, he was also puzzled. This palace master rarely showed herself. Why did she suddenly appear now and look for a disciple who just entered the divine palace? Alchemy room number 701. Qin Feiyang was in the ancient castle. He was concentrating on copying the kill formula. Dong! Suddenly, a series of knocks could be heard in the ancient castle. Lu Hong, who was arranging the medicinal ingredients, frowned slightly and said, It's that Lin Dian again. Ignore him, Qin Feiyang said without turning his head. Qin Feiyang, I'm the palace master of the Pill Palace. Please come out. However, before he could finish his sentence, a very calm voice could be heard in the ancient castle again. Immediately, Qin Feiyang raised his eyebrows. Lu Hong said in surprise, Why is the palace master of the Pill Palace here? Qin Feiyang's eyes flashed and said, I just came to the divine palace. I'm not famous. It's impossible for her to look for me, unless Wolf King asked. Unless what? Qin Feiyang said in a deep voice. Unless she knows that I can concoct the potential pill. Then what should we do? Lu Hong, Wolf King, and the other two beasts were a little anxious. No matter how high Lin Dian's status was, he was only a disciple of the Divine Palace. He had to follow the rules here. However, the Palace Master of the Pill Palace was different. She was one of the leaders of the Divine Palace. The entire Pill Palace was under her jurisdiction. She had the right to make Qin Feiyang open the door. If Qin Feiyang didn't open the door, even if she broke the stone door and barged in, no one would dare to question her. Because she had the right. Qin Feiyang's eyes flashed. He suddenly smiled and said, Don't panic. I'll take care of it. After saying that, Qin Feiyang left the ancient castle and appeared in the alchemy room. Then, with a thought, the stone door slowly opened. When the stone door was fully opened, the white-clothed woman came in uninvited. She stood in front of Qin Feiyang and looked at Qin Feiyang. Qin Feiyang also looked at the white-clothed woman. He bowed and said, Greetings, Palace Master. The white-clothed woman nodded and asked, You're Qin Feiyang? Yes, I am. Qin Feiyang replied respectfully. The white-clothed woman said, Close the door. Yes. With a thought from Qin Feiyang, the stone door automatically closed. I don't like to beat around the bush. I heard that you've opened the gate of potential. Can you show me your potential imprint? The white-clothed woman said. As expected, Qin Feiyang's heart trembled, and he straightforwardly pulled open the clothes on his chest. Because the other party had obviously come prepared, there was no point in hiding it. Looking at the potential imprint on Qin Feiyang's chest, the white-clothed woman's eyes flashed, and she asked, Which level have you opened? Qin Feiyang said truthfully, The 5th level. The 5th level. Shock appeared on the white-clothed woman's face. Originally, she thought that Qin Feiyang would at most open the 2nd or 3rd level, but she never thought that he would have already opened the 5th level. In other words, from the extreme warrior realm to the extreme war emperor realm, this child had not left behind any of the gates of potential. Qin Feiyang was about to close his clothes, but the white-clothed woman suddenly reached out her hand and said, Wait. Qin Feiyang frowned without leaving a trace, because the white-clothed woman's gaze had shifted to the concentric knot. The white-clothed woman looked at the knot curiously and asked suspiciously, What kind of imprint is that? Qin Feiyang had an idea and laughed. This is a birthmark. I was born with it. Heart-shaped birthmark? The white-clothed woman was stunned for a moment and said with emotion, There are really all kinds of strange things in this world. Chapter 691. After Qin Feiyang tidied up his clothes, he smiled and said, Hall Master, it shouldn't be that simple for you to look for me, right? The white-clothed woman was shocked. She shook her head and smiled. Zhu Yu said that you're smart. I didn't think much of it at first. Now that I look at it, you're really smart. Zhu Yu? Qin Feiyang looked suspicious. After thinking carefully, he figured it out. Zhu Yu was the ugly old woman's real name. So, Zhu Yu was the one who told the Pill Hall Master about him? However, he didn't mean to blame Zhu Yu, because the Pill Hall Master would know about it sooner or later. Since you've guessed it, I'll be straightforward. I hope that you can contribute the potential pills formula. The white-clothed woman said. Qin Feiyang frowned. He shook his head and sighed. It's just as I expected. However, I can't hand over the formula. Please forgive me, Hall Master. The white-clothed woman wasn't surprised by Qin Feiyang's answer, because the potential pill was too powerful. If it were her, she wouldn't contribute it either. However, everything could be discussed, right? She looked at Qin Feiyang and smiled. I know that it's a bit difficult for you to do this. However, you're a disciple of the Divine Hall now. Shouldn't you do something for the Divine Hall? Qin Feiyong smiled faintly. That's right. However, I don't have to hand over the formula to do something, right? Then tell me, what else do you have that's more valuable than the potential pills formula? The white-clothed woman asked. Qin Feiyong wanted to laugh and said, Then I'd like to ask, did the others make any contributions when they entered the Divine Hall? The white-clothed woman shook her head. That's weird. Why don't they make contributions? Why do I have to? Is it because I'm special? Qin Feiyong looked at her confusedly. The white-clothed woman was shocked. She realized that she was speechless for a moment. Hall Master, to be frank, the potential pills formula is my private property. It has nothing to do with the Divine Hall. Disciple has no obligation to contribute. Thus, I hope that Palace Master can forgive me. Of course, this disciple also believes that the Divine Hall is a selfless place and will not resort to forceful acts. Qin Feiyong cupped his hands and said. The woman in white stared at Qin Feiyong in a daze. Only now did she realize that she had been completely led by Qin Feiyong. Her purpose for coming here was very simple. She only wanted the pill formula for the potential pill. But in the end, Qin Feiyong dragged the topic to the issue of justice and righteousness. Until now, she didn't know what to say. In fact, before coming here, she had also thought of forcing Qin Feiyong to hand over the potential pill formula. But now that Qin Feiyong said this, he really couldn't do it. Because once he did so, it would be tantamount to admitting that the temple was a place of corruption. This shrewdness, this scheming, is not simple. The white-clothed woman sighed. She shouldn't have said things like contribution. She was just digging a hole for herself. All right, I won't force you, but I still hope that you can think about it carefully. The white-clothed woman forced a smile. Qin Feiyong nodded and said, I will think about it seriously. While he was talking, he moved his mind, and the stone door that was tightly shut slowly opened. Indirectly, he gave the order to leave. All right, go ahead and cultivate. I won't disturb you any more. The white-clothed woman shook her head and smiled. She turned around and walked into the alchemy room. She looked helpless. When she walked out of the Pill Palace, Wan Qiu and Gao Ming had just arrived at the plaza outside of the Pill Palace. Immediately, Gao Ming's pupils shrunk. What's wrong? Wan Qiu was suspicious. Gao Ming transmitted his voice. She's the Pill Palace Master. What? Wan Qiu's eyes trembled. The Pill Palace Master rarely shows herself. Why did she suddenly come here? Gao Ming frowned. After the white-clothed woman left, Gao Ming grabbed the arm of a Pill Palace disciple and asked softly, Brother, why did your palace master come back? That disciple shook his head and said, I'm not too sure either, but I heard that she's looking for someone called Qin Feiyong. Looking for Qin Feiyong. Gao Ming's face turned pale and said, Wan Qiu, I need to find a place to send a message to senior brother Lin Dian. You stay here and guard first. Without waiting for Wan Qiu's reply, it turned around and ran into a small forest in a hurry. It then took out an image crystal. Soon, Lin Dian's virtual image appeared. Lin Dian frowned and said, What are you doing? Wan Qiu asked, Did you inform the 13th prince? Yes. He said that he'll meet this Qin Feiyong tomorrow. Lin Dian said. Wan Qiu said anxiously, He can't wait until tomorrow. He has to do it now. What's wrong? Did something happen? Lin Dian asked confusedly. Yes. Just now, the Pill Hall's hall master went to meet Qin Feiyong personally. Wan Qiu said. What? Lin Dian suddenly stood up and said in shock, Why is she looking for Qin Feiyong? No one knows, but I'm sure that it's related to the potential pill. Because other than the potential pill, there's nothing else that can make the Pill Hall's hall master come personally. Wan Qiu said in a deep voice, If that's the case, we have to hurry up. All right, I'll send a message to Her Highness now. You guys wait for us over there. Lin Dian turned off the image crystal after he finished speaking. At the same time, in the ancient castle, I thought that she would force you to hand over the pill formula. I didn't expect her to give up so easily. Seems like the person in charge of the pill hall is a reasonable person. Lu Hong looked at Qin Feiyang and said with a smile, "Reasonable. Don't be naive." She just heard what I said and didn't want to do anything. Qin Feiyang sneered. Wolf King frowned and said, "So the crisis isn't over yet?" "Of course. She'll come looking for us sooner or later. Her attitude won't be like today. We can't wait any longer," Qin Feiyang said in a deep voice. "What do you mean?" Lu Hong looked at him in shock. Qin Feiyang said, "If we continue to wait like this, we don't know when the first prince will receive the news. We have to take the initiative." Lu Hong said, "Are you sure that the big shots of the Divine Palace will be afraid of the first prince?" "He's not a prince anymore. He's the crown prince. He's above everyone else. Even the big shots of the Divine Palace have to give him some face," Qin Feiyang said. Lu Hong nodded and asked, "How do we get his attention?" "I haven't thought about it yet." Qin Feiyang shook his head and fell into deep thought. Buzz! Suddenly, the image crystal in his arms rang. Qin Feiyang took it out and saw that it was a message from Fatso. However, the illusory image that appeared was that of a burly middle-aged man. This was naturally Fatso in disguise. Qin Feiyang asked, "Are the gold coins not enough?" "Definitely not enough. But this is only secondary. Fat Lord found a treasure in the treasure pavilion." Fatso waved his hands and feet and roared excitedly. "What treasure?" When Wolf King heard the word treasure, his eyes lit up and his saliva flowed out. "Dragon blood," Fatso said word by word. "What?" The people and beasts trembled, both physically and mentally. "He actually found dragon blood? How is that possible?" "Fat Lord swears that he's not lying to you. It's the steward of the General Pavilion who said it himself. But the problem is they won't sell it." Fatso said, a little angry. Qin Feiyang asked how much. "I don't know about that." Fatso shook his head. Lu Hong said, "Why won't they sell it? Can't they agree on the price?" If only it was a problem with the price. That steward said that the dragon blood is the treasure of their treasure pavilion. No matter how high the price is, they won't sell it. Fatso said in distress. "If that's the case, it's indeed a little troublesome." Lu Hong frowned and looked at Qin Feiyang next to her. Qin Feiyang pondered for a moment, looked up at Fatso and said, "Give me the coordinates, I'll go and talk to him." "Okay." Fatso immediately gave the coordinates to Qin Feiyang. Qin Feiyang also immediately left the castle, changed into the clothes of the temple, opened the portal, and descended into an unfamiliar room. The room was not big, about 100 feet, but the decoration was very high-end. Whether it was the tea table, the chairs, or the floor, they were all carefully polished with high-quality jade. And Fatso was sitting in the chair in front of the tea table, but he was the only one in the room. "Where's the steward of the General Pavilion?" Qin Feiyang asked. Fatso said, "He went to prepare the herbs." "Wait, why don't you ask where this is?" Qin Feiyang rolled his eyes and said, "Isn't this the VIP room of the General Pavilion? I've been here before and nothing has changed." "I see." Fatso smiled embarrassedly. He actually asked such an idiotic question. It was simply lowering his IQ. Creak! Soon, an old man with white hair and wearing a white robe walked into the VIP room. When the old man saw Qin Feiyang, he couldn't help but be stunned. He looked at Fatso and asked, "This is—" Fatso coughed and said expressionlessly, "He's my family's young master." The old man immediately put on a smile and greeted, "So it's a distinguished guest. Come, come, please take a seat." Qin Feiyang smiled faintly. He sat on the chair and looked at the old man. More than 10 years ago, the steward of the general pavilion was also this person. His name was Sundahai, and outsiders called him Old Sunday Sundahai, also looked up and down at Qin Feiyong. Seeing that Qin Feiyong was wearing the uniform of the temple, he smiled and said, "I didn't expect young master to be a disciple of the temple. Nice to meet you." Qin Feiyong smiled faintly and said, "There are countless disciples of the temple. There's nothing to be honored about." Sundahai was stunned. Others were proud of being a disciple of the temple, but this person's tone was indifferent. Could it be that he had some special identity? Thinking of this, Sundahai's eyes flashed slightly, and he cupped his hands and said, "May I ask which big family young master is from?" Qin Feiyong smiled and said, "Treasure Pavilion is a place to talk about business. I don't think there's a need to talk about these personal matters." Sundahai was stunned and hurriedly said with a smile, "Young master is right. Don't talk about personal matters, just talk about business." As he said that, he took out a Qianquan bag from his arms and placed it on the tea table. He smiled and said, "These are the medicinal herbs you need. My general pavilion stock is basically all here." Qin Feiyong grabbed it in his hand and sank his mind into it. Immediately, his pupils shrank slightly. The medicinal herbs inside actually filled half of the Qianquan bag. Although it wasn't as many as Fatso, and the others went to the branch pavilion to sweep the medicinal herbs. But one must know that there were 9 branches. In other words, Chapter 692. Sundahai glanced at the two of them and said, "The total value of these herbs is 565. 3 billion. I can give you a discount. 65. 3 billion less in one go. Elder son, you are really generous. Thank you." Fatso was overjoyed. "It's all Fat Lord's fault. It's too polite to thank me." Sundahai waved his hand and smiled. But before he finished speaking, his face suddenly changed as he hurriedly said, "Brother, the discount I'm talking about is 300 million, not 65. 3 billion. Don't get it wrong. 300 million? Fatso was stunned. His face darkened as he said, "Old man's son, why did you go back on your word?" "When did I agree? I said I'll give you a discount, but isn't the discount 300 million? You're the one who misunderstood me," Sundahai said anxiously. "The discount can be 55, 3 billion, or 65. 3 billion. You didn't make it clear, and now you want to go back on your word." "Old man, you can't go back on your word when doing business. This will damage your Treasure Pavilion's reputation," Fatso said. "Then I won't sell it. I'll lose too much." Sundahai was anxious. Qin Feiyong put down his Qianquan bag and looked up at Sundahai. He smiled faintly and said, "Elder son, this money is a small matter. I'm here to discuss a big deal with you." Sundahai was stunned and asked curiously, "What big deal?" Qin Feiyong said, "I need your Treasure Pavilion's dragon blood." Without waiting for Qin Feiyong to finish, Sundahai shook his head and said, "No, I'm not selling dragon blood. Don't be in a hurry to refuse." Qin Feiyong smiled faintly as he took out a potential pill and placed it on the tea table. 4 pill veins. Sundahai's eyes lit up when he saw the pill veins on the potential pill. Qin Feiyong smiled and said, "I'm not asking you to look at the pill veins. I'm asking you to see if you've seen this kind of pill before." Sundahai grabbed the pill and looked at it carefully. A trace of suspicion gradually climbed up his old face as he muttered, "Strange. Why haven't I seen it before?" "It would be strange if you've seen it." Fatso smiled disdainfully. However, he was extremely confused. Wasn't Boss not planning to sell the potential pills? Why did he take the initiative to take it out now? Sundahai glanced at Fatso, then looked at Qin Feiyong and smiled. "Little brother, don't keep me in suspense. Just tell me directly. This pill is called the potential pill. It was refined using 33 types of medicinal herbs. Its function is to help people open the door to their potential. Qin Feiyong said. I see. Sun Dahai nodded in realization. But he suddenly stood up and stared at Qin Feiyong, saying, What did you just say? Open the door of potential? Qin Feiyong nodded. Sun Dahai felt as if he had been struck by a bolt from the blue. His mind rumbled as he looked at the potential pill in his hand. His face was filled with disbelief. What a joke! The door of potential could actually be opened with pills. It's not real. It's definitely not real. He looked at Qin Feiyong and said with a calm face, Little brother, I don't like to joke. Who is in the mood to joke with you? Look at what this is. Fatso snorted and tore open the clothes on his chest. Sun Dahai looked over in shock. When he saw the potential imprint, his pupils immediately shrank. He hurriedly ran in front of Fatso and carefully looked at the imprint. Fatso rolled his eyes and said, Don't worry, it's not drawn with ink. Sun Dahai raised his head and looked at him, then lowered his head to look at the potential imprint. Gradually, he couldn't help but mutter, This is really the potential imprint. Damn it, this isn't a dream. He seemed to be powerless as he sat on the chair. Looking at the potential pill in his hand, he still found it hard to believe. A moment later, he looked at Fatso and frowned. How can you prove that your door of potential was opened by this potential pill? Damn, how can I prove this? Fatso was a little angry. Sun Dahai shook his head and said, Then I don't dare to believe your words. After all, this is too unbelievable. Qin Feiyong smiled and said, You can find someone to try. Find who? Sun Dahai asked instinctively. To be honest, he was still a little confused. Qin Feiyong said, You can find anyone. As long as their cultivation level is at 9 stars, it's fine. Sun Dahai said, What about me? I'm a 9-star battle master. Can I do that too? Yes. However, the prerequisite is that you have to find someone who is stronger than you. Borrow his aura to help you open the door of potential. Qin Feiyong nodded. All right, I'll try. You guys wait here for a while. After Sun Dahai finished speaking, he got up and left in a hurry. After Sun Dahai left, Fatso immediately frowned and asked in confusion, Boss, what exactly are you planning? I have no choice. I have no other choice. Qin Feiyong sighed deeply and told him about the pill hall master looking for him. I see. After listening, Fatso suddenly realized and said, So, you want to use Zhenbao Pavilion to expose the potential pill? That's right. If it comes from us, they might believe it. But Zhenbao Pavilion is different. As long as Zhenbao Pavilion releases this news, it will immediately cause a huge storm in the capital. Qin Feiyong said. Fatso nodded. This was the truth. As Zhenbao Pavilion's reputation was well known, no one would suspect that Zhenbao Pavilion was lying. In the outskirts of the first district, there was a standalone courtyard. The courtyard wasn't big, but birds were chirping and flowers were fragrant. The small trees were verdant and exuded endless vitality. At this very moment, a woman in a white dress was squatting in the middle of the flowers. She was watering and weeding. She looked like she was 25 or 26 years old. She had a graceful figure and a peerless appearance. Her hair was black and beautiful. It was casually draped over her shoulders. Every move of hers was filled with a unique charm. Whoosh! Suddenly, a white-haired old man appeared out of thin air. It was Sun Dahai. Sun Dahai looked at the woman in white with a respectful expression. Greetings, Pavilion Master. Obviously, this woman was the Pavilion Master of the General Pavilion. The entire Zhenbao Pavilion of the Great Qin Empire was under her jurisdiction. It could be said that she was extremely powerful. The woman in white looked up at Sun Dahai and smiled. Old Sun, why are you here? Her smile was very charming. Her voice was also very pleasant to the ears. It was like an aureole leaving the valley. However, it made one unable to have any blasphemous thoughts. Today, I encountered something very unbelievable. I would like to ask the pavilion master to verify it for me. Sun Dahai said as he walked towards the woman. He then took out the potential pill and handed it to her. The woman sized up the potential pill and asked doubtfully, "What pill is this?" The potential pill. It is said that it can open the door of potential. Sun Dahai said. When he said this, even he felt that it was a little ridiculous. The woman was slightly stunned. She looked at the potential pill carefully and looked up at Sun Dahai. She smiled and said, "Old Sun, when did you learn to joke?" Sun Dahai smiled bitterly and said, "My pavilion master, do I look like I'm joking?" The woman looked at Sun Dahai's face. He was really not joking. At that moment, she also realized the seriousness of the problem. She put down the watering pot in her hand and took the potential pill. She frowned and said, "Who gave this to you?" Sun Dahai said, "A disciple of the temple." "Tell me the details," the woman said. Then she looked at the potential pill and walked towards the pavilion not far away. Sun Dahai followed behind her and told her everything in detail. He did not hide anything. After entering the pavilion, the woman gave the potential pill to Sun Dahai and said with a smile, "If what he said is true, then you have picked up a big bargain this time. Take it." Sun Dahai nodded. These words were not false at all. If he really succeeded in opening the door of potential, he would indeed have picked up a huge bargain. He took a deep breath and put the potential pill into his mouth. The potential pill melted in his mouth. Immediately, an incomparably majestic energy rolled towards his limbs and bones. At the same time, the woman also released a trace of pressure. Although it was only a trace of pressure, Sun Dahai half knelt on the ground on the spot. You have to know, Sun Dahai was a 9-Star Wars sect, yet he couldn't even withstand a trace of the woman's pressure. One could imagine how terrifying her cultivation was. Even though Sun Dahai was powerful, the intense pain that came from his body made him wish he was dead, and he held miserably. Moreover, all the pores on his body were spurting out blood. In an instant, he was like a bloody man dripping with blood. About 20 breaths of time passed. Boom! A low rumbling sound suddenly exploded from within Sun Dahai's body, as if some kind of shackle had been broken. Following closely, the pain disappeared, and his entire body felt incomparably comfortable. He felt as if he had been reborn at this moment. His essence, energy, and spirit were all different from before. "How is it?" the woman asked with a smile. "Previously, I felt as if I had entered the gates of hell, but now I feel very comfortable." Sun Dahai replied, then tore open his clothes and wiped off the blood on his chest. He was immediately dumbfounded. The smile on the woman's face also froze. On Sun Dahai's chest, there was a white potential imprint. It really works. The two of them were dumbstruck. Suddenly, the woman quivered, looked at Sun Dahai, and said with a serious expression, "Old Sun, let me tell you, you must build a good relationship with him." "I understand." Sun Dahai nodded. To Zhanbao Pavilion, a person who could refine such a pill was simply the god of fortune. The woman waved her hand and said, "Go wash off the blood on your body first, then have a good talk with him. Try to find out more about him." "All right." Sun Dahai replied respectfully. Then he opened a teleportation gate and left in a hurry. Potential pill. When did the Great Qin Empire produce such a pill? Seems like the imperial capital is going to change. The woman looked at the clouds in the sky and muttered to herself. At the same time, Pill Hall. A man wearing a mask and Pill Hall's uniform strode into the square. This man was about 8 meters tall, and his body was skinny. Although his face couldn't be seen, his pair of dark eyes were extremely spirited. Senior Lin Dian. Seeing this man appear, Gao Ming immediately ran up and prepared to greet the man in black. because he knew this man's identity. But before he opened his mouth, the masked man said in a low voice, "There's no need for formalities, lest my identity is exposed." Chapter 693. Gao Ming looked around and asked suspiciously, "Where's senior brother Lin Dian? Why don't I see him? I didn't ask him to come. If he walks with me, he'll be a big target. It'll be easy for people to guess my identity. I don't wish for those half-brothers of mine to come and ruin my plans at such a crucial moment. And to hide my identity, I even found a set of Pill Palace's disciples' clothes. I've done so much. I just hope that Qin Feiyang won't disappoint me," the masked man said. There was a hint of coldness in his eyes. Gao Ming smiled and said, "As long as you're here, he won't dare to be arrogant." "Yes, yes, yes." Wan Chou also nodded and bowed, his face full of flattery. "Lead the way." The masked man waved his hand. "Okay." The two of them immediately turned around and walked towards the Pill Palace. But just as they entered the door, the white-haired old man who was guarding the Pill Palace suddenly raised his head and looked at the masked man. He frowned and said, "Who are you? Why haven't I seen you before? Hurry up and take off your mask." The masked man walked to the window and took off his mask. The white-haired old man's pupils contracted. "Don't meddle in things you shouldn't meddle in." The masked man immediately put on his mask and looked at the white-haired old man coldly. He then walked into the Pill Palace without looking back. "What's going on today?" The palace master suddenly came back. Even the 13th prince secretly came to the Pill Palace? Looking at the masked man's back, the white-haired old man was confused. After a while, Gao Ming and the other two arrived in front of Alchemy Room 701. Wan Chou said softly, "Your Highness, Qin Feiyang is in this alchemy room. Knock on the door. Don't make too much noise." The 13th prince said, "Okay." Wan Chou nodded. He then walked to the door and knocked on it. But after a while, the stone door didn't open. Gao Ming said angrily, "His Highness is here, but he still doesn't open the door. This bastard is too arrogant. We didn't even tell him your Highness's identity. How would he know?" Wan Chou glanced at him with a trace of disdain. However, it was hidden very well, and Gao Ming did not notice it at all. "Then what should we do?" Gao Ming asked. It was somewhat at a loss. It couldn't let his Highness stand here and wait, right? However, if he revealed the identity of the 13th prince, wouldn't everyone in the alchemy rooms know that the 13th prince was here? It would definitely be lively then. The 13th prince was also somewhat annoyed and said, "Continue knocking. When he gets impatient, he will naturally open the door." "All right." Wan Chou turned around and kept knocking on the stone door. But what they didn't know was that Qin Feiyang wasn't in the alchemy room at all. At this moment, he was sitting at the tea table with Fatso, leisurely drinking tea. Creak! The door to the VIP lounge was suddenly pushed open. Sun Dahai walked in with quick steps. His entire person was hale and hearty, glowing with health and vigor, as if he had become a few years younger. Qin Feiyang also put down his teacup and said with a smile, "Looking at your appearance, you should have succeeded." "Success?" Sun Dahai nodded. He couldn't even close his mouth from smiling. Qin Feiyang said, "Then let's continue the discussion." "Of course, let's continue the discussion." Sun Dahai sat opposite Qin Feiyang and went straight to the point. He asked, "Little brother, how many of these potential pills do you have?" "Why?" Qin Feiyang didn't understand. "I want to buy all of them." "Of course. It would be best if you are willing to sell the recipe to me." Sun Dahai said with a smile, "Do you think it's possible? To tell you the truth, before coming to the precious treasure pavilion, the Pill Hall's hall master personally came to find me, but I didn't give her the recipe." Qin Feiyang said lightly, "I'm just saying. Little brother, don't mind me." Sun Dahai immediately smiled apologetically. He knew that it was impossible, because no one would be so stupid to give such a heaven-defying recipe to someone else. He only mentioned it because he wanted to be lucky. There's no need to mind. I also admit that I still have a lot of potential pills, but I need dragon's blood. With dragon's blood, anything can be discussed. Qin Feiyong said. Sun Dahai frowned. What do you want dragon's blood for? Qin Feiyong said, this has nothing to do with you. You just have to say whether you want to sell it or not. This, Sun Dahai hesitated for a moment and said, can you change it to something else? Because dragon's blood is really the treasure of my precious treasure pavilion. No. Qin Feiyong shook his head, not leaving any room for discussion. Fatso said slowly, Old man's son, if you miss this village, there won't be another shop. Think carefully. Sun Dahai lowered his head and struggled. Actually, dragon's blood wasn't of much value to the precious treasure pavilion. However, dragons were legendary existences, so dragon's blood became rare and mysterious. At the same time, it was also a symbol. Since ancient times, there was a legend that the emperor was the reincarnation of the true dragon, and the empress was the reincarnation of the true phoenix. So, a dragon would be embroidered on the emperor's dragon robe. This made dragon's blood extraordinary. It was also because of this that the precious treasure pavilion designated dragon's blood as the treasure of the precious treasure pavilion. But now, the other party was here for the dragon's blood. If he didn't give it to them, there would be no chance for cooperation. But if he gave it to them, he couldn't bear to part with it. Sun Dahai's heart was in a dilemma. It seems that elder son won't be able to make a decision in a short period of time. Then I'll return to the temple first. But you have to be quick. Maybe one day when I'm in a good mood, I'll sell all the potential pills to the temple. Qin Feiyong stood up and laughed, then took out a teleportation gate. Sun Dahai's eyes trembled, and he hurriedly stood up. All right, let's make a deal. Elder Sun is indeed a straightforward person. Qin Feiyong revealed a victorious smile, kept the teleportation gate, and returned to his seat, saying, Let's talk about the deal. Sun Dahai carefully considered for a moment and said, 1 drop of dragon's blood for 10 potential pills. Puff! Qin Feiyong and Fatso were both drinking tea. Hearing this, they spat it out. 10 potential pills for 1 drop of dragon's blood? What kind of joke was this? You guys are buying dragon's blood, so you must know how rare it is. Every drop used is 1 drop less. You can say that its value can't be measured by price. To be honest, I'm already giving you guys a discount by offering this price. Sun Dahai said. He wasn't joking, and he was very serious. Dragon's blood is rare, but isn't the potential pill rare? To put it bluntly, you can only look at the dragon's blood, but the potential pill can open the door of potential. I believe you don't need me to tell you the benefits of opening the door of potential. Now tell me whose value is higher. Qin Feiyong said. Sun Dahai frowned and said, Then what's your plan? 1 potential pill for 10 drops of dragon's blood. Qin Feiyong said without hesitation. Impossible. Sun Dahai shook his head without hesitation and said, 9 potential pills for 1 drop of dragon's blood. This is my biggest compromise. Qin Feiyong stood up and sneered. This is your sincerity? Let me tell you, I don't want it. You can keep the dragon's blood and slowly admire it. He was really angry. Did he think that the potential pill was like a cabbage that could be picked up anywhere? Sun Dahai's expression changed, and he hurriedly said, Don't, let's talk again. As long as we are patient, we can talk until both of us are satisfied, right? Qin Feiyong shook his head and said, I don't have time to waste. 1 potential pill for 2 drops of dragon's blood. If you agree, it's a deal. If not, I'll leave immediately. This is too little. Can't you add a little more? Sun Dahai looked at him pitifully, like a little girl who was being bullied. Qin Feiyong and Fatso had goosebumps all over their bodies. Old man's son, you're a businessman. How can you be so short-sighted? I don't mind telling you that as long as you cooperate with us, those shiny gold coins will flow into your precious treasure pavilion endlessly like the river. Fatso walked up and hooked his arm around Sun Dahai's neck, smiling meaningfully. I understand this logic, but Sun Dahai nodded with a troubled expression. In the end, he gritted his teeth and looked at Qin Feiyang. How about this? 1 drop of dragon's blood in exchange for 1 potential pill. Qin Feiyang pondered for a while and said helplessly, All right, I'll take it that I'm at a disadvantage. You're at a disadvantage? Sun Dahai couldn't help but roll his eyes. Qin Feiyang said, Let's not talk about the small talk. Hurry up and get the dragon's blood. Deal. Sun Dahai nodded and turned to walk out of the VIP room. Fatso followed with shifty eyes. When he saw Sun Dahai disappear at the end of the corridor, he closed the door and chuckled. Boss, we've earned big this time. Did we? Qin Feiyang was stunned. Of course we did. Back in the spiritual state, a potential pill with 1 pattern could only be auctioned for more than 10 billion, and one with 2 patterns could only be auctioned for more than 20 billion, Fatso said excitedly. Stop. Qin Feiyang reached out and interrupted him, shaking his head. You're wrong. What's wrong? Fatso frowned. Think about it. Can the spiritual state be compared to the capital? There's no lack of rich people here. Let me tell you this. If a potential pill is auctioned here, it can be auctioned for at least 10 times. Qin Feiyang said. 10 times. Fatso was stunned and shook his head. That's too exaggerated. Qin Feiyang smiled faintly. If you don't believe us, we'll wait and see. If that's the case, then those potential pills auctioned in the spiritual state will be a huge loss. Fatso mumbled. About 100 breaths passed. Sun Dahai returned with a jade bottle in his hand. The jade bottle was very small, about the size of a pinky finger, and it contained half a bottle of blood. Sun Dahai carefully handed the jade bottle to Qin Feiyang and said, This is the dragon blood you want. Qin Feiyang glanced at the jade bottle, reached out and opened the bottle cap. An invisible pressure immediately rushed out from the inside. This pressure was the dragon's aura. However, this dragon's aura was not very strong. Fatso was quite excited at first, but now he frowned and said, Could it be the blood of a flood dragon? This was because the blood of a flood dragon also carried some dragon's aura. How is that possible? This is definitely real dragon's blood. It's just that too much time has passed and the dragon's aura has faded. You're tuning in to the Thunder Spear YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.